The House will come to order. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Morgan motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file, herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2834, an act relating to energy. Morgan moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2834 and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
The member from Dakota, Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is your bill, the Omnibus Energy Bill, and we do need to go to a conference committee of 5 people. I will move that we refuse to concur. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Atkins motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2853, an act relating to commerce. Atkins moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2853 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is my motion. I hate to admit it, but we sent a bill over to the Senate and they found a technical error that was in it. They made the fix, and I figured we should probably own up to the fact that they made the fix. I've discussed it with Representative Hoppe. They just added in a couple of words on several lines relative to including the term or protected non-public data. It was supposed to be in the original bill. Didn't end up in the original bill, but they made the catch and they've sent it back. And with that, I'd appreciate a positive vote in favor of concurrence.
Any discussion to the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill a third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House File 2853 as amended by the Senate.
Third reading as amended by the Senate. Any discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill.
Madam Speaker.
It's all right. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. Zellers votes aye. Hortman votes aye. There being 102 ayes and 23 nays, the bill is passed as amended by the Senate and its title adopted. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 3241. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 3241 on the calendar for today, an act relating to claims against the state.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaker, members, the Joint Committee of the Claims on Claims recommends the payment of $83,332.34 be paid to the Department of Corrections for claims that people have made. Most of the claims are personal injuries that came about from sentence to serve work crews, and several of them had to do with fingers. The second section of the bill arises out of an unusual situation with the Department of Transportation and a company that has fled the state, and they had a contract. The Department of Transportation had a contract with M.G. Carlson Incorporation to fix and renovate the train depot's roof. The workers on that, some of the workers on that roof renovation did not get paid prevailing wages. A constituent of John Ward, Representative Ward, filed a claim. There was $10,000 or so left with the Department of Transportation by the company. So the Claims Committee recommended paying the claim of that individual that filed the claim from that $10,000. And the remaining money from the $10,000 that was left with the Department of Transportation, we are recommending that the Department of Transportation contact the remaining workers and give them their due back as much as possible within the remaining part of the $10,000. That's it.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 3241.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Members, Representative Murphy, thank you for putting this together. I've had a lot of people talk to me about the one issue on the second part of this bill. The committee spent, I believe, well over an hour just on this one issue. It deals with a situation where a contractor mismarked the type of work the employees were doing, so they were not paid the correct wage on their prevailing wage. There was a bond that expired before the audit was done, before we found out the issue with the improper wages being sent. There was a retainer fee that had been set aside by the contractor that he had not claimed. So what the committee decided to do, since the employer had fled the state and we were not able to contact him, he is not contacted for his final payment, to appropriate the funds that were left in that general fund, or that account that only the employer does have access to be returned to him. We proportion it out to the number, balance it out between all, possibly up to 8 people that could request the funds. So it's put it out fairly to all the employees that that could actually have a claim to that. The money was sitting in the account, and we can use that fund. So there's no action on this part of it. There's no funds from the state that will be used to make that payment. Thank you.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If the author would yield.
She will yield. Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Chair Murphy, does this bill take care of people who have had their fingers cut off?
Representative Murphy.
Or even parts of them. Yes.
Representative Davids.
If they were on a sentence to serve crew, and if they were injured in the line of work.
Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Chair Murphy. I will not be asking for any names.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to Representative Murphy and to Representative Simon and to Representative Johnson. I think are the three House members that sit on that joint committee. Are there others, Representative? I think it's of three of you. And members, this was a constituent of mine that Representative Murphy was talking about, who did not get paid his fair, just dues. The MnDOT had the money, should have paid the money, in my opinion, and did not pay the money. And this was the process that was set up. I had a bill introduced this session that would have changed that process just because of this. But I'm so appreciative of Representative Murphy and the Claims Joint Council to do what in my opinion was the right thing. And they went beyond my constituent and then just said that the other, I think it was 6 other members that had claims coming as well. And it was the right thing to do. And so when we can do the right thing here, members, and get it done fairly and justly, I'm appreciative of that, and especially appreciative because this was the major claim was one of my constituents. So I strongly urge support of the bill and appreciate all the work that the Claims Committee did on this. Thank you, members.
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Ward, I agree. Your constituent had the money coming. And unfortunately, there was retainage still available within the contract. I believe MnDOT could have worked through the process and have taken care of Representative Ward's constituent. There was 2 bonds on the project, both a performance and a payment bond. Representative Ward's constituent had his money coming under the payment bond provision, which unusually the payment bond provision had expired, but the performance bond was still outstanding. Same bondholder in both cases. The bonding company was the same. I believe MnDOT should have paid Representative Ward's constituent and not used the claim process. I believe this process was misused here. I think MnDOT should have worked with the constituent and paid not only Representative Ward's constituent, but the other constituents out of the retainage that was available. Chair Murphy, I appreciate this bill, but members, I'm not going to be able to vote for this claims bill because I think this process was done wrong in this instance. But I want to make sure that folks know most of this claims bill is non-controversial. The payment of Representative Ward's constituent is non-controversial, but I believe the process is being misused. And the worst thing is, Madam Speaker and members, I think it sets us up for this to be interpreted to be used differently in the future than it is in this case. This constituent had this money coming and should have been paid, and the money was there to pay. I believe it's a him, doesn't matter, him or her, and it should have been done that way without coming to the legislature. I'm going to be voting no, unfortunately. Thank you, members.
The member from Itasca, Representative Anzelc.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, what this discussion about the prevailing wage tells me is that clearly if we had in statute adequate enforcement of private contractors who are required to pay the prevailing wage, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in. And I too want to add my thanks to you, Representative Murphy and your colleagues, for what you're doing here. But this needs to be corrected statutorily with real enforcement of prevailing wage for workers.
Any further discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, Representative McNamara, I understand your concerns. I have them as well. I believe Representative Ward has them. That is why he authored this bill that we do plan to work with together next year to get this through so this issue will not come up again. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 83 ayes and 42 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 2103. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2103 on the calendar for today, an act relating to transportation.
The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson. The other one. The member from Lake of the Woods, Representative Erickson R.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, Senate File 2103, House File 2425 is for license plates. We have cold weather testing areas. Believe it or not, in northern Minnesota, we have cold weather testing areas. We have companies that come from all over the world to test their vehicles. We're trying to do a quick little fix for some of these companies that take these vehicles and take them and do warm weather testing. So the bill basically asks to take and change the cold weather testing on the license plates to environmental testing, so that we can take care of that fix. And I would appreciate your support.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2103.
Third reading, Senate File 2103. Discussion to the bill. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 126 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 2608. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2608, an act relating to local government.
The member from Itasca, Representative Anzelc.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is a very simple bill which repeals the Grand Rapids Central School Commission, which was created by statute in 1986. It's 28 years later. The Commission has completed its work, and I ask for your support to repeal it. Thank you.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2608.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 125 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 2312. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2312, the first engrossment, an act relating to state government.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, this is the Department of Administration unsession bill. And members, it's eliminating obsolete language, and it rearranges some of the two statutes, 16B and 16C. If you look at the bill, if you have the bill in front of you, there's a lot of stuff going around here, but it's basically trying to move all the stuff dealing with procurement into 16C, and to make it simpler for the people that come to the state of Minnesota that want to sell products to us, for them to understand. Previously, they had to jump back and forth between the two statutes. This way, all the procurement pieces will be in 16C, the other parts will be in 16B, and it just simplifies it and makes it more efficient for everybody. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2312.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 126 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2724. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2724, the first engrossment, an act relating to state government.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this is the rulemaking bill that the governor brought forward as part of the unsession. I would not call it an unsession bill because it goes beyond what we've been doing in most of the unsession bills that are going forward. This has a little more substance to it. Over the years that I've been here in the legislature, we've heard lots of complaints, and sitting on the Government Operations Committee, lots of complaints from people about how lengthy our rulemaking process is and how tough it is. This summer the Government Operations Committee held a committee hearing dealing with, to get an idea what how the rulemaking process works, because a lot of the members on the committee were new to the process. And this kind of spurred the governor's staff, all the departments across the board, to look at the rulemaking process, and they came back with this idea that creating, the bill basically, there's a little bit of cleanup, but the biggest part of it is they're creating a new expedited rulemaking process that they can take truly non-controversial items to get them done, and the rules get done faster. In some cases now that takes 18 months to get these rules processed. Some of the examples they've given, they might have been able to get done in 4 to 6 months, or 4 to 8 months. They would have been able to get them done and get the bills that we pass on board faster. There's supposed to be a handout going around. I hope that you get that. But with that, members, we got amendments. We'll go through the amendments and I'll take questions.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pugh moving to amend House File 2724, the first engrossment, as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
The member from Carver, Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. As you can see, if you've looked at your packets, your amendment packets, I've prepared and have submitted quite a few amendments to this bill. We heard this bill in government operations some time ago now, and it might sound strange, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about the ramifications and the negative consequences, just far-reaching consequences that this will likely have on unsuspecting citizens throughout our state, which are just very significant. I sure wish it wasn't so, but I strongly believe that it is. And so I've had a series of amendments drafted to hopefully limit the scope of this bill. Members, there's no need for this bill. In fact, as we heard Representative Nelson say, this was presented to us as an unsession bill, but we just heard that there's really very, very little unsession in here. It's far-reaching. In fact, if passed without significantly amending this bill, it will become much more difficult for citizens and small businesses to stop proposed agency rules and the heavy hand of government telling the people how it's going to be. This is a big government bill through and through. There's not a single one of our constituents who are asking for anything in this bill. I would go so far as to say that. In fact, I'd also go so far as to say that the vast majority of our constituents have no idea what a rule is or the consequences of it, let alone what the rulemaking process looks like. Members and Minnesotans, make no mistake, this House File 2724 is a power grab by the agencies. In fact, before I present my first amendment, which is very, very important, I came across a quote that absolutely rings true here. He who makes the rule, he who writes the rules, makes the rules. And as Representative Nelson said, this isn't an agency bill. It's been written by the agencies. In fact, I believe that it was written by a lead agency, the PCA, if I'm not mistaken, but it has a great impact on so many agencies. I did also pass around a handout that I would like to draw your attention to. It's a 3-page handout, and it's peach on the back. And I was absolutely shocked to notice. I quickly pulled up the 25 top agencies, and 21 of them will be affected by this bill. And there's another 100 agencies on the peach color sheets that all have this rulemaking authority. So that brings me to my first amendment, the A1, which again is just very important. It's a reasonable amendment. I'm hopeful that it might be a friendly amendment. It should be, in my opinion. I just heard today that the National Federation for Independent Business is in support of this, and I can understand why. Because what this amendment does is it changes the requirement from 50 requests from concerned citizens about a particular issue back down to 25 where it is right now. And I would ask for a green vote.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I oppose this amendment. When the bill was originally drafted, and there's been a lot of iteration, but I've been working with concerned citizens groups and with the governor's staff. Originally, they proposed to going to 100, and I felt that was way too high to go to, and we got them down to 50. And as we're going through the process, I asked the lead person on this, which was the gentleman from the PCA, but it was all the governor's departments that were in on this, but he was just the lead person. And I asked them to give me information about, on the last couple of years, what type of, where they are, how many requests they get for hearings, where they're at on it, and that's the handout that you should have in front of you from the department, from me, that's got my name on it. And this is the history of them. Of the ones that have gone forward, as you read through this, they're either less than 10 requests for hearings or well over 100 if it's controversial. There's only one on here that wouldn't have made the 50 mark, and that had to do with air quality in indoor hockey rinks. And when they brought forward that, when they asked for requests for hearings, they knew they only needed to get 25. They got 41, and they said that, well, if we needed to get 9 more, we could have got 9 more to get to 50. It wasn't that big of a deal for them. But if you look at this, most of them, they either get a lot or they don't get any at all, and that's why they want to raise it up so that they can get through the process and work through the process quicker. So members, I ask you to vote against it. I know this might be tough for some people, but if and it wouldn't break my heart if it goes on. I'm going to say that it's not going to kill the bill if it stays at 25. But like I said, in the past it hasn't been an issue. So members, I would say vote no.
The member from Anoka, Representative Abler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and I'll just comment to this amendment and then the whole bill. 16 years I've been here, privileged to serve in this great body. And one of the best things we do is have public process, public inclusion. It says in the front up here, Vox Popularum est Vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. And which is interesting in the National Day of Prayer that we listen to God and to the people. But this bill that Representative Nelson has is going the whole wrong direction. And you've made your career, Representative Nelson, to care about the working man, the regular people in your district. We have similar districts full of people just trying to get by. They don't have any idea what goes on here. And when something comes along to their mind about some proposed rule, if they even know one's coming, they barely know what to do. They scribble out a note saying, I want to have a hearing. In the bill, it says it has to be a qualified request. You have to specify what line. You can't just object in general. This will take away people's rights to engage in the rulemaking process. Many of us have run in the past on rules that have been passed or in processes that have gone awry. And so if the departments want to have a smoother way to pass rules, I oppose that. Rules should be hard to pass. It's hard to pass a law. When we pass the profile learning came out of a 3/4 of a page bit of language in the statute book, and they out of that generated hundreds of pages of rules and thousands of pages of performance packages that the department foisted upon all our school districts. I ran against that in 1998. And that was an issue back then, if you remember, and we got that to go away in terms of a much better system, which we now operate under with other standards that are much better derived. And so the strength of our system is inclusion of people who don't really know all the details. They just want to be a part of it. They want to engage. And so if it makes the departments happy, well, good, but they serve us. And so the 25 is really important, Representative Nelson. To go to a less is a wrong direction. And many other amendments are coming. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just in general, it should be hard to pass a rule. It should be a good rule. It should be well vetted. You need a lot of notice. You need 60 days notice. This bill changes that. You want to make sure people who don't have lawyers and big accounting firms and staff watching them cannot be harmed by a rule. These rules have the force of law. They are law. They come along and they say, oh, you didn't do the rule. What? And here you are trying to survive. We heard last night about the great success of this session in helping business in Minnesota. There's another side of that story. Some of the effects of this session these last years are harming business in Minnesota. This bit of regulation will make it harder for business to succeed. Representative Nelson, you are one of the best people here. I know your heart's good. This bill is not good for the people you care about. It's not good for Minnesota. It's not good for the people. It's not good for the businesses. And businesses are mostly families trying to have their little 3-person operation. They're not corporations. They don't have legal counsel. They're like my clinic, just trying to get by. Just trying to get by. So please, this bill shouldn't go forward. It needs a lot more work. It should have a lot of bipartisan support. And it needs to be well thought through when you make these kinds of big changes. So please, vote yes on this amendment. Vote yes on all the amendments. It'll be a much better bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Abler, for having offered your expertise, having contributed in such a great way to the process. And I completely agree with everything that you just said. I do have several points that I'd like to make. You know, this is really a simple request. We're only talking about a number here, just continuing to make it as easy, as difficult. There are many situations that have come up where it's been very difficult for groups to achieve that 25 threshold. In fact, we're going to be covering more in this bill that will make it even more difficult for citizens to achieve that number. Also, I wanted to underscore the fact that rules, and again, most Minnesotans who are watching us right now who are saying rulemaking, rules, what is that? Rules hold, and I learned this as a first-term legislator. I did not understand what rules were. Rules hold the full force of law, and it's just really stunning what the consequences of that can be. Representative Abler mentioned that in this bill that there will be, other qualifiers, so it won't just be that citizens can say that I oppose this rule and I would like to have a hearing. It's going to be a much more in-depth process. I see this as snuffing out the voice of the people, and that is just not what we want to do. In fact, Governor Dayton, we all heard his presentation last night, the State of the State address. And one of the first notes that I took of something that he said was that we need to offer transformation of government services. It was presented in the context of what his vision is for Minnesota, a transformation, as I maybe am interpreting, but of the accessibility of government. This is not, he would be so disappointed to see this bill and to learn in the direction that we're planning on going, making government much less accessible to the people. He also said some people believe there's no role for government. And I don't think any one of us in this body knows of anyone who really believes that. Anything that would hold weight. So again, I implore you, for the citizens of Minnesota, this is such a simple request. Just leave well enough be and vote green on this amendment. Thank you.
The member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and members. If the author would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Gruenhagen.
Representative Nelson, I won't go over some of the other concerns that have been voiced, and I'm sure your intention is good. But on line number 1719 on your bill, it says an agency may also use this process to adopt rules it determines are non-controversial if there is other law authorizing the rules. So to me, unless I'm missed something here, and that's what I'm asking for your clarification, you basically have the agency deciding what's controversial and what's not controversial, which smacks a little bit of the fox guarding the hen house, okay? And I'd just like to add one other thing. I know a former administrative law judge for the state here, and his critique of the agencies in terms of expanding and making rules that have a high cost for businesses, both small and even larger in the state, he said is an egregious process, and if anything, we should make it more difficult for agencies and not less difficult, which appears to be the way your bill is going. But if you'd respond to that line 1718 or 1719 and 1720.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Gruenhagen. To the comment about this, this new expedited process we're putting here, and that's what you're quoting from. We're not getting rid of the regular rulemaking that we already have. We're not getting rid of any of the rulemaking. This process is going to be set up for the stuff that is truly non-controversial, and the agency will pick if they think this is. But they got to pick this. Be careful when they pick this expedited process, because if they go through this process and now all of a sudden it is more controversial than they say it is, it gets kicked back into the regular process, and it's actually going to take them longer to get the rules made that they need to get made than if they had picked the right process in the first place. So, I mean, there's a lot of fear that they're saying that they're going to use this process for everything and slam through stuff that's controversial. If they do that, it's going to get kicked back into the other process, and the rules won't get made as fast as they want, so it's actually going to take them longer. So they're going to have to be careful about how and when they pick the rulemaking, which rulemaking process to pick, whether it's the regular rulemaking process, this new expedited process, going through the good cause exemption, going through
getting passed in a bill that they're not subject to rulemaking. If they pick this process and it truly is not non-controversial, they're going to take longer and it's going to be worse for them. So that's my comment.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Nelson. But it still appears that they are the one determining of what the controversial, non-controversial, and that as a result, it's a little bit of the fox guarding the hen house, I think. And ultimately, this rulemaking process, which I've had some complaints about in my own district, is not well understood under the public. We're making it more difficult for the public to participate based on previous comments, so I won't go over those. And the other thing, I think it undermines and chips away at the legislative authority that we have here as representative of the people. So regardless of which side of the aisle we're on, I think the amendments being offered by Representative Pugh to narrow the scope and ramifications of this would be well intended, and I'd appreciate it if you reconsider your support of them. Members, on a nonpartisan basis, I'm coming to the same conclusion that the ramifications of this bill is much greater than what it appears on the surface. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the author of the amendment yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Pugh, you stated that there were many examples of times where citizens were not able to muster the 25 signatures already required, and I'm wondering if you could identify for the body those situations, the agency involved, the rule that they were challenging, and the number of signatures that they were able to muster that was below the 25 threshold that currently exists.
Representative Pugh.
Madam Speaker, Representative Dabney, no, I'm sorry, I can't, and I maybe did use the word many, I don't recall, but I know that there are, and I see that we have this handout from Representative Nelson, and I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I obviously believe that all of this is accurate, but my concern, Representative Dabney, goes well beyond the number. This amendment is a very simple amendment just to keep things as is. And I think you'll see, if you haven't yet read the bill, although maybe you have, that there are a lot of other restrictions that are in this bill that are going to make it much more difficult for everyday citizens, some of whom have no idea what concern they might be experiencing at some point in the future. They have no idea about the rulemaking process. And now what if this bill goes forward without significant amending, what it is going to look like to actually submit a request and achieve that threshold of 50, not just 25, but 50, in order to receive a hearing.
Representative Dabney.
Will the author of the amendment yield to another question, Madam Speaker?
She will. Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Pugh, I recognize that many may not have been the right choice of words, as you indicated it may not have been. Do you have any examples?
Representative.
Do you have any examples with the specifics about the agency, the rule, and the number of signatures people were able to muster below the 25 threshold?
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Dabney. I don't have a specific example. I'm very concerned about all of the rules and the onerous the onerous heavy hand of government on unsuspecting citizens who don't know what it is going to take to, in fact, achieve the threshold. And Madam Speaker, if I could ask for a roll call, please.
Representative Pugh requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Dabney. Representative Nelson. The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Pugh, for bringing this forward. And just to comment to the last round of questioning about who this might affect, and I don't have an example for you, Representative Dabney, but I do know that I have, for example, I have one lake association where there's only about 40 residents on the lake. So if there was a rulemaking issue, I don't know how they would get up to 50. They'd have to find people that didn't even live on the lake to affect it if it was a rule affecting the lake. So I think you just have to look at this broader, especially those of you in rural areas. think of some of the issues that might affect a township. Maybe a lot of people don't care about it because it's just a few people in the township. I know Representative Dabney in Minneapolis and St. Paul, this doesn't seem like this could possibly be an issue, but who I'm speaking to here is those members that represent areas that have some townships that have very few people, and if there's if you want to challenge a rule being made, how difficult would it be to go and get 50 signatures if you only have a few folks in your township? And so I just encourage everyone to think broader, especially the rural members. And again, thank you, Representative Pugh. I encourage members to support this very important amendment.
Further discussion. The member from Carver, Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, this bill speaks of the arrogance of government. You know, thank you for this amendment. We have to keep the threshold very low for people to access government. I just can't believe it. I mean, it almost reeks of it in this room. People standing up and saying, "No, we have to raise the bar, and we've got to have this huge threshold." That's not the way it's supposed to be. I'm an older guy, and I didn't get involved in you know, this process, this business, until I was older, and I didn't know how a lot of things worked. And I should not have had to have an army of 50 people, you know, in front of me to clear the path before I could get in there and access this thing. Look, it's the people that we serve, the people we must listen to, and the people need to have the ability to access government, get in there and talk about these rules, and not have an army out there holding them back. Thank you for the amendment. Let's go green on this.
Further discussion to the A1 amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question was asked by Representative Nelson about an example of someone that would support this amendment and everything else. I just recently received an email from the National Federation of Independent Businesses that have very serious concerns and support the Pugh amendment on this. So it's quite clear that the business community, particularly the small business community, has problems with this, and the National Federation of Independent Business is very concerned. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is a very, very simple amendment, and it's kind of common sense. I quite frankly, am a little surprised that Representative Nelson didn't just take this amendment. We can disagree about many aspects of this, but in the time that I have been here, rulemaking has expanded every single year, and I've heard more and more complaints, and it's clearly something that we need to pay more attention to and not less. It should be a little bit less controversial than I think it's being played out to be right now, so I think we should just vote green on this and move on.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair and members. You know, Representative Daphne, you wanted specific examples. Well, I've had some specific examples. One is in the area of septic tanks and some of the rulemaking that and I understand there's abuses in that area, but some of the people on fixed income that live in the rural area, the additional requirements issued that drive up their cost as far as replacement of that system. I also have a business in my former district in LeSueur County. They manufacture a product that is a form of a generator. And every time they meet the MPCA's requirement of how much exhaust comes out of it, then the MPCA comes up with a new rule, sends them a new letter, and says, well, you got to meet this. So no matter how many improvements they make, the agency simply makes up rules to require the company to make even more changes. The third example I'd give you, there was a company that was going to build an expansion and hire additional people. And the rulemaking process they had to go through with the DNR and the MPCA drove up their cost exponentially. So again, I believe that those examples and numerous other ones is how making this rulemaking process more difficult is going to drive up the cost for small businesses and even mid-sized businesses. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think what was just talked about, the business trying to expand, that's not rulemaking, that's permitting, and those are rules that are already made. But members, if you heard me when I said this originally it was 100. I got them down to 50. I got the departments to get down to 50. But I said it's not going to kill the bill if it goes on, and it's not going to break my heart if it goes on, is what I said. So, members, let's just vote and move forward with the rest of the amendments.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In this unsession bill, I am disappointed when you take away access of the people, the voice of the people, the power of the people. We can do in legislation generate rules, and sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. And we do at times review rules. And the citizens have a voice because they elect us, they hold us accountable. The bureaucracy that generates the rules needs to hear that voice, needs to listen to the citizens of the state. And anything that diminishes the voice of the citizens of the state should never find itself in an unsession bill or any bill. So I say vote green. Do not diminish the voice. Let the people be heard and vote green.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Khan votes no. Representative Khan changes from yes to no. There being 104 ayes and 25 nays, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hamilton and others moving to amend House File 2724. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A2.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I did speak to the author, and I also spoke with the Chair of Ag Policy, and I think we have an agreement. This is just reinstating existing language, not changing the intent or anything like that. Just reinstating existing language, and it has to do with farming operations when a public hearing is necessary for proposed rule change. So I'll stand for questions.
Representative Nelson.
Would Representative Hamilton stand for a question?
He will. Representative Nelson.
Representative Hamilton, we spoke earlier on this, and with what this requirement is that when that's in current laws, when something affects agricultural, that they're supposed to have one hearing in an agricultural area. Now, currently, my understanding is what I've been told is that the agencies do this by opening up a remote office and by video conferencing, open up that office and have people come in and testify there by video conference, and then the meeting is actually held here. That's what they've been doing. And what they've had is they've had nobody showing up to these video conferences in these offices. And what they're just trying to do is have some flexibility here. But are you, would your amendment be willing to accept what's currently going on, the current practice that they're doing? Mr. Representative Hamilton.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to the author, you know, I haven't heard any complaints the way they're currently doing it now. I was looking at some of the information that you sent out, and I know, especially back in the mid-'90s when we had changes to feedlot rules and regulations, we were hearing much more people were involved. So I would say if it's currently working with the remote locations where people can participate that way, I would say that's fine. I haven't heard anything negative to that, but I do like the existing language in the event there was an issue. So again, I ask for your support.
Representative Nelson.
With that, Madam Chair, I would say vote yes on the amendment, the A2 amendment.
Any further discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pepin moving to amend House File 2724, the first engrossment as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A3.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. My amendment just simply removes the section that the agencies wanted that says that they don't have to provide 60 days notice when they're going to make a rule change. Again, this is about transparency. Representative Nelson, you said that these are truly non-controversial bills, but I think the word on line 5.19 that's really telling, and whether that's the case or not, is it says an agency intending to adopt expedited rule under this section. So to me, that tells me that the agency decides, not the people. And I believe that the people should decide whether it's controversial or not. And there's many reasons for that. It doesn't have to be any ill will by the agency. It's just that if they're not personally affected by it, how do we know? How do they know if there's somebody in a community that's affected by this rule? They just may not have the knowledge. So I think that allowing agencies to decide what's controversial and what's not controversial is a disservice to the citizens of Minnesota. It's really what it's doing is saying that the average person shouldn't be able to have notice of things that are controversial. And before we rejected the Pew amendment that would have made it easier for folks to get a hearing. So I think at the very least, members, we ought to make sure that people who may not know, because they're in their own business, they're in their own personal life, they may not know what's going on, they should at least have an opportunity, a reasonable opportunity to find out what's going on. So members, I ask for your support. And Madam Speaker, I'd like a roll call.
Representative Pepin requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I stand and oppose the A3 amendment. In the process of this bill, they put in more notice to people, and as I said earlier, the agencies don't want to have to take longer to get the rules done, and that's why if they choose the expedited process, if they choose the wrong path to go down, it's either the full rule process, the dual notice. This would be after the dual notice, down in order. If they choose the wrong path to go down, they get kicked out if you get too much objections, and they'd have to go back through the whole process. So it's going to take them longer. It's important that the agencies pick the proper path to go down. Otherwise, they're going to end up having more problems in the long run. So Madam Chair, I stand and rise and oppose the A3 amendment. Please vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the author yield for a question?
The author of the amendment? Or the author of the bill?
Author of the bill.
He will yield. Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Nelson, I was wondering with regard to notice to the public hearing or the expedited process, if it were Department of Commerce, for example, and if it were electricians that might be affected, would all licensed electricians get a notice of the rulemaking? If it was a board of cosmetology, would all the hairstylists get a notice? Or would this just be simply published in some obscure area that most people don't pay attention to?
Representative Nelson.
Madam Speaker and members, if you look on page 19 of the bill, under the expedited rulemaking process, they have to do, if they're going to go this new expedited process, they have to do a notice plan. And so if it's dealing with cosmetologists would get notified. They want to reach out to make sure that the people that are affected by the rule, if it's a rule dealing with cosmetology, they're not going to go to all the farm bureaus and notify them, because they're probably not going to care much about it. But they're going to try and reach out to the people that it affects, the interest groups, and make sure that they know about the rule, so that if there is objections, they get them in so they can get back into the full rulemaking process. They don't want us. They're not. The idea is not to pull something over on our population. The idea here is to do the easiest process possible, so that the laws that we passed can get the rules made so that it can be instituted and move forward from that. And when the truly non-controversial rules can get written without a long delay, the stuff that needs to be looked at in the long process will get looked at under the regular rulemaking process.
Representative Hertoth.
Thank you for that explanation, and with a little levity, I hope that you weren't inferring that farmers don't want to be well groomed.
Further discussion to the A3 amendment. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Sanders moving to amend House File 2724, the first engrossment as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A4.
The member from Anoka, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And Representative Nelson, I hope that you'll be able to accept this amendment. I hope that perhaps maybe this was some oversight, although I've heard that maybe this is some compromise language. But I have some grave concerns about what we're doing to Section 10 in this bill. And what my amendment would do is actually strike Section 10 from this bill and keep the current statute as it's written in place and intact. Members, I think that I've come to a spot where I realize how important this chamber is, the legislative process, how important the checks and balances are, the separation of powers. And I think that the legislature needs to take back some of its authority in a lot of areas, and I think that this is one of them. What we have here in the language, Representative Nelson, currently what we say is that the rulemaking process, say that they have 18 months to publish a notice of intent to adopt rules, and at that point in time that they have the ability to amend, repeal, or promulgate those rules. But this section gets rid of that timeline requirement. It literally eliminates in line 7.8 the legislature's authority to demand that those agencies come back to the legislature if in a year and a half they can't send out a notice of intent for a timeline and to promulgate their rules after 18 months. All we do is we're telling these agencies, you got to send a sorry note. But nowhere in this bill does it actually say that you have to start the process over. It strikes the legislature's authority to actually demand that if you can't write your rules in 18 months, that you have to come back and get reauthorization from the legislature. Members, I think it's time that the legislature, the House and Senate, quit ceding its authority to agencies and to executive administrations, and that we actually do our jobs. And for me, I think rulemaking authority is one of those very, very serious issues where the legislature too often cedes its power and its authority, and I ask for members' support.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I stand and oppose the A4 amendment. The reason that the agencies, and the reason why we're doing this here is we all know how basketball used to get played when there wasn't a time clock. And players would sit there and drag out, and you'd have low-scoring games, and it's a way to not get things done. Well, that's kind of what's happening to some of the agencies. We propose a law, we pass it, we tell them to make the rules to make the law work, and the agencies don't want to do it. So they drag the clock out, and to get to the 18 months, and voila, they don't have to make the rules. And our bill that we passed doesn't go into effect because of that. So what this does is, in truly complicated cases, this is just the opposite of what we were talking about earlier with the expedited process. In truly complicated cases where they may need just a little more time to finish the rule up, and we just had one of these recently with Mississippi, the rules along development along the Mississippi River, and that it ran out of time, and the clock ran out, and now they had to start over from scratch. So what this does is allow them to say, okay, we did need just a little more time to get this done, and we can get it done. It may make a better process. It may make these rules come out better, and it'll make the agencies take away their ability to run the clock out on us and not get the rules put into effect. So, members, I urge a red vote on this.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, that's an excellent example. They couldn't get the rule done in 18 months, a year and a half. And they just came back to the legislature, and they did it the right way. They came back to have their rulemaking authority reauthorized. That's what should happen. The problem with what you said is, even though that's your intent, it's not in this bill. It can go on, their rulemaking authority can go on into perpetuity without ever needing to be reauthorized or examined by the legislature. All that this bill says in lines 710 through 712 is that you just have to send a sorry note. Sorry, we failed to get this done in time. Nowhere in here does it say what the consequences of that are, or that there's a timeline, or that there's any other sort of guidelines or rules that the legislature would put around that in place. So we, in a sense, are completely removing the legislature's authority, completely removing those checks and balances, letting agencies have rulemaking authority into perpetuity. I don't think that's correct. I think the legislature needs to retake some of its power and authority, and I think that this is a great way to do it. And I'm not even asking to change anything. I'm just saying at least let's keep that 18-month, a year and a half timeline, that time frame intact, to make sure that if you can't get something done, clearly there's something wrong. So come back to the legislature and have some reauthorization for what you need done. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a roll call.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker and members, I think that this is a very important amendment. You need to look at the wording of the bill. I believe what this allows is it allows the agencies to outlast the legislature. The agencies know that we're up for election every 2 years, and if this allows them to just wait to see if the tide changes in November for them to offer their rule. It also allows them to, after we're gone, to do what they want. What Representative Sanders said before is so true. This allows the agencies to have the power that we should have, the elected officials. We stand for election every 2 years. If we vote how our constituents don't want us to vote, we're voted out of office. But agency folks can be there for years and years and years. And what we're doing with this entire bill is we're giving them more power and authority without accountability. I call this bill in its entirety the lack of transparency and accountability bill. And I don't believe that this is what Governor Dayton meant when he talked about unsession. I don't believe that that's what he wanted to do. But members, if you vote for this bill, I believe it means that you're not in favor of accountability and transparency. This bill is not in favor of the little guy who's just out minding his own business when all of a sudden an agency rule comes before them. You're expecting people to know what to do when the power of government comes knocking on their door. That's intimidating for people, and we all know that. We all know that a lot of people aren't involved in the process at all until it affects them personally. And this bill requires more work on behalf of folks to be able to challenge a big government agency. If the PCA wants to do something to their lake or to make a new regulation or rule that affects their business, The average person doesn't know what to do, and what we're doing in this bill was requiring more signatures for a hearing. We're requiring expedited rulemaking, which makes it, frankly, makes it more easy for the rule to just slip by without folks having enough time to realize it. I know that there's no ill intent in this bill, and Representative Nelson, you've worked very hard on this bill. But overall, this is just giving agencies and ceding more power to the agencies. And this amendment is very important because we need to be able to make sure that the agency is doing what we direct them to do. And this isn't a partisan issue. We shouldn't just allow them to run out the clock until the political tides change, because they're going to be there longer than we are. It's just the wrong way to go. And members, I truly hope you will vote for the Sanders Amendment. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, just remember that we always have the right to pass legislation, override rules, and we have the right to pass legislation if we told them to make rules and they're not doing it, to get them to put those rules into effect ourselves. So, members, this is just a way, again, for the more complicated rules, some of the ones that have more controversy, to be able to maybe have a little more time to get them done, get them over the hump, so that we don't have to start the process all over again, and so that the laws that we pass can get instituted. Please vote red.
Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I first got here, was just quite a while ago, but not as long as some. There used to be a legislative commission to review administrative rules, and that would basically hold those rules until the legislature could act on them and decide what to do with them. That's has long since been gone by the deal, and today we have a rule that says, or a law that says that advice and consent from the committee that's jurisdiction over those departments that promulgate rules can ask the department to reconsider their rules until they act on them. That's the closest we got now today, but either one of those I think would be a very positive thing to have, so we can have jurisdiction over those rules, because I remember many times people will accuse us of making a law that they didn't like, and yet we found out it was a rule that some department of state government made and not the legislature. So the difference, they might have the power of a law, but we're accountable for every one of the rules that they make. So I think it's time maybe we start a legislative commission to review administrative rules again, or something else.
Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Nelson, I just want to clarify, you use the example of the Mississippi River critical area as one that why you need this, or why you don't support the amendment. Members, it's important to know that the Mississippi River critical area, thank goodness for the process, and it was limited to the 18 months, because it had mistakes and didn't work. And it came back and was redone, and I believe now we probably will get it done properly. But we would not have wanted to give them more time and let it drag out more. It was not properly drafted, it had problems in it, and it's been fixed. Members, please support this amendment.
Representative Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I don't plan to talk on every amendment, but like Representative Gunther mentioned, when you've been here a while, you understand the process. And you think you pass something in a law, and you give rulemaking to kind of do what you think are a few minor details, and they can expand your project for or against the intent you have, depending upon who the particular member at the agency is to do that. And they do have the force of law. And Representative Nelson, just to kind of go back to something you mentioned, well, it's just a little change here, a little change there, a little change here. But what's happening is you're going to lose your legislative oversight of these very matters. Oh, yeah, we can pass a law to undo it. Good luck on trying to pass a law to undo some things that are a little controversial, because all three groups have to agree. The House, the Senate, and the governor. And if it's a divided government, someone might actually like that idea that went through that you never designed it to be. And so this bill is full of stuff like this. And when you take away the legislative authority and cede it to the administration, whoever the administration is, be it a left or right side of the spectrum, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, whichever, you lose a lot. And at the end of the day, we're responsible to the people, and you do not want to undo the power you have, the influence you have as the proper role of government by giving away all this authority for indefinite time. On this particular matter, to this particular amendment, these become indefinite forever. All they have to do is publish a little notice in the journal, in this little place, and tell us why they were late. But they never expire. 8 years from now, they could pop up again with a rule on this very matter because the authority doesn't expire. Very dangerous, members. Representative Nelson, I know how good a guy you are. This bill is going to do harm to the very people you say that you serve and the people I serve. So I bet it passes. I bet people are going to be on your team. They're going to support all these amendments. They may oppose the amendments because you asked them to. But members, please watch these amendments. Please watch the authority you're giving away by virtue of sticking with your team. Some of the worst work, Mr. Speaker, with all respect to the Speaker and the authority he has, are when we stick with our team and pass something because we have to get it done over time, and seen that in 16 years. Some of the best work is when people get in a room from all persuasions and they come up with an outstanding plan that serves Minnesota the best. This bill needs that kind of work. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And 18 months. This week is a good example of why we should keep this. I've seen some very wonderful legislators gavel in our sessions. And I've sat on committees and had a discussion about new rules, and the chair asking, and the agencies do the rules and they try to interpret what is the legislative intent. What's the intent that we had when we did the bill, when we debated in committee? And frankly, if they're going to do the rules and interpret, it's a lot easier if we still had the members that built that intent into the bill. And the longer you wait, if you cut off, you say you can go past 18 months, we could be missing some of that institutional knowledge where people move on to real life from this interesting endeavor that we do to try to serve the people. And I like the idea that if you're going to do the rules, you're going to implement the intent of the legislature, you do it in a timely fashion, and this amendment will help to keep it timely. So please vote green.
Representatives, seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 69 nays, the motion has not prevailed. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pepin moving to amend House File 2724, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A5.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers and members. The bill says that when requesting a public hearing, the reasons that what was added was the reasons for the objection to each portion of the rule must be identified. And I think that's a little broad. I think sometimes it's difficult for some members of the public to explain exactly why or to make sure that they hit every legal reason. And so I don't like that language. My language would simply say a written request for a public hearing is not invalid due to the failure to request to correctly identify the portion of the rule to which the person objects. So the point of it is to say, you know, the guy doesn't. If you want to have a hearing, you don't have to write it perfectly. You don't have to identify every part of the rule that you don't like the rule and you'd like a hearing. And that's all this amendment does. And I'd like your support. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I think this is a good amendment, and I think we should all vote yes on this. This is the current practice they have. And there was talk earlier about they're now asking them to give a reason. Well, they're asking for a reason why you object to the rule so that they can try and work it out and they can try and fix it when they bring a rule forward. The example I gave in committee is, I don't like your house because it's an ugly house. Well, why don't you like my house? I mean, that's real broad. Well, I don't like your house because you painted it purple, and I'm a Green Bay Packer fan and I hate the color purple. So that's a specific reason. We can fix that. I'm not saying that I'm a Green Bay Packer fan, but that's just an example. So I mean, so anyway, I say, members, I'll accept the Pepin amendment. Please vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pugh moving to amend House File 2724. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A6.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. What this amendment does is it deletes Section 21, and which is entitled Expedited Process. So this is the expedited rulemaking process. And there are there's several things in here that are justification for the deletion, but I think I'll limit my comments to the most egregious, and that would be that this is the broadest expansion of power because the agency would be allowed to determine what is non-controversial. And we've had several members here today questioning that, still very unclear about that, what that would look like. And it would seem to me that a determination as to what is non-controversial and how the agency would proceed would require a more significant input from the parties that were concerned with whatever the issue is. And then it makes it virtually impossible through expedited rulemaking for anyone to effectively oppose it. So I would ask for a green vote in striking this section, and I would ask for a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Speaker. And I oppose this amendment. This basically guts the bill. And there is an out on the expedited rulemaking process. If they get now 25 signatures saying they think it's controversial, it gets kicked back into the regular rulemaking process. And again, it's up to the agencies to be judicious about what lane they take when they're doing the rulemaking. Because if they choose the wrong lane and then it gets kicked back in another one, it's actually going to take them longer than if they had gone through the regular process in the first place. And again, if you go back to the handout I had, if you read down here about the DNR, they'll do the due notice and they go to the hearings because they know the stuff is controversial. MPCA, when they know the stuff's going to be controversial, they're not going to pick a thing that's going to make them take longer. They're going to try and do it the process to give the input from the people of the state of Minnesota. So, members, please vote no.
Further discussion. Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the bill yield?
He will. Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, I am looking at the new language in Section 21, and I guess I'm troubled by all the latitude we are giving the agency here to enter into expedited rulemaking process on their own without the checks and legislative direction and legislative deference that we have normally given them in law and we give them currently in law. Line 17.15, if an agency is adopting or modifying a rule to conform to changes in federal law, they can, on their own, go into expedited rulemaking without any checks from the legislature. Line 17.19. If an agency may also use expedited rules and move into that later category of rulemaking on their own if it determines that the rules they are proposing are non-controversial. So, Representative Nelson, this, as I read this, if the agency on itself, and I don't see any definition of what non-controversial is, any direction from the legislature limiting the boundaries of the agency to determine on their own that a proposition or a proposed rule is non-controversial, that's troubling to me. But Representative Nelson, is there a definition for non-controversial?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And no, there's not in the bill, there's not a definition of non-controversial, but I think that's pretty, we know when something becomes controversial because we get phone calls and emails, and they get phone calls and emails of something, and I think they've got a pretty good idea of that. Again, in the Section 21, Subdivision 6, additional notice plan, if the agency is going to use this new expedited policy, they need to come up with a plan to reach persons or classes of persons who might be affected by the proposal. So they're going to be doing additional outreach before they go through the expedited process to find out, to get to these people. As we talked about earlier, the cosmetologists. If they're doing an expedited rule on cosmetology, they're going to do a plan to reach out to these people so that they get input. And if it is more controversial than they think, that kicks them back out of this expedited process into the regular, full-blown, either dual notice or just the regular rulemaking process. So members, there's safeguards built into this. And again, as I said earlier, it's going to be judicious of the departments if they're going to bring a rule forward and they think it's non-controversial. If it's not non-controversial, if there's controversy around it, and they pick the wrong route to go down, they're going to have them taking longer to get their rules made, and so they're going to get kicked back out of this quicker process into the longer process, and it's going to take them longer. So that if they choose the wrong way, they're going to end up taking longer to get their rules made.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield again, please?
He will. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't completely follow all the last part of what you said, Representative Nelson, but line 17.15, so it appears to me that if there is a perceived need by the agency to develop rules to conform to federal law, they can jump into the expedited rulemaking process. Are there any other checks on the agency or limits on their ability to, if something has a federal initiated component in their eyes, to jump into this lane? Are there any limitations for them at all?
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Drazkowski, there are the limitations that are currently on them now, just as in the regular process. If the federal law is passed and says you have to do this, then we're going to have to do that, and that's what that part is about. If we pass the laws you talked about earlier on line 17.20, if we pass a law that says this is what the agency has to do, this is what that expedited process is for, and it's no different than what we have now.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Nelson. Well, I still don't see how the people of the state of Minnesota are protected by this expanded authority that is just given to these agencies to, on their own, jump in the expedited rulemaking process. This is a process that they are allowed to make rules with less input from the people, and we are allowing them to do that through their interpretation of what they see in front of them, guided by an undefined and a relative term, non-controversial. So the agency is we're going to grant the agency the ability to use this term, non-controversial, at their discretion without any definition in statute as to what that means, and yet it's a relative term that you, Representative Nelson, or me, or Representative Quam, or anybody in this body may have a different interpretation of what non-controversial means. And I would suspect that you're going to have the same relative differences in interpretation with each of the members of the agencies. You're going to see the same differences in interpretation of what non-controversial means between agencies, and you're going to see differences in interpretation amongst the 5.3 million people of the state of Minnesota. But what we are doing here, and what we are doing throughout this bill, members and Mr. Speaker, is we are telling the people of Minnesota that, people of Minnesota, you need to yield to these agencies, because we are going to give them more authority to develop rules that will impact you without, in many cases, your ability to provide the level of input into the process that you had before. And this is the bill that we are bringing to them. This bill is telling over 100 agencies in state government that they have the ability to have more power now to develop more rules that have the force and meaning of law upon the people of Minnesota, and we're going to grant them that authority and make government bigger, make the people smaller, and tell the people that they have to yield, because government needs this authority to bring more dictates to the people of Minnesota. Mr. Speaker, I encourage a green vote on Representative Pugh's amendment, and I believe she may have a roll call. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I could not recall if I did ask for a roll call.
You didn't, but
I would like
you
to
are
request
now,
a roll
so
call, please.
seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this is just a very important amendment. I want to thank all those of my colleagues who have spoken in support of this amendment: Representatives Gunther, Pepin, Abler, McNamara, Drazkowski, who have shared their expertise. They have shared their institutional knowledge with the body and with Minnesotans. And I'm hopeful that people from corner to corner of our state may wonder now, really, what is a rule? They may understand now what the consequence is of such a bill as changing all of our rulemaking in such a dramatic way. You know, as a first-term representative, I don't have that institutional knowledge. I don't have that expertise. And I don't have specific examples either. But what I do have is my intuition, every fiber of my being when I heard this bill, and I have been thinking about it ever since, and that was some time ago, is telling me that this isn't right to be doing this, to be doing this kind of overreach to the citizens, unsuspecting citizens of Minnesota. I share Representative Drazkowski's concern about the broad authority that this body may cede to the agencies if this amendment is voted down. I'm concerned, and I'm going to reference this again, the handout that I shared, the handout with the top 25 agencies and 100 agencies in our state that have rulemaking authority. You know, to me, when I saw this list, I looked it up, and I fully did not expect that I would see a list of 100 agencies. And in fact, I'd like to just read a couple, because these are the top 25. We're talking about the Department of Human Services, the Department of Education, the Minnesota Management and Budget, the Department of Health, the Department of Natural Resources, and you all have this on your desk, but this, to me, what we are doing here in Minnesota with rulemaking, This is analogous to me of an experience, several experiences that I've had when I've been in Washington, D.C., and I've seen a visual pile of what 2,700 pages of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, looks like. And then I've seen on the same stage the 10,000 plus pages of regulations, of rules that were written by unelected bureaucrats. I spoke with a federal attorney who's familiar with this type of thing, and I'm certain that that is just one example of how 9/10 is what he stated. 9/10 of the law, because remember, a rule has the full effect of law, is written by non-elected bureaucrats. We are remiss if we are not highly concerned. And again, I think that's support for a green vote on this bill. I'm also concerned, Representative Nelson, about the lack of clarity about this non-controversial subject. You know, I would love to think, I think we all would, that our citizens, our constituents trust us. They trust us to do the best and work on their behalf. But my experience here would tell me otherwise, that there have been bills that we have heard, and we have heard from so many of our citizens, and the votes have been so against the will of the people. I can understand how they might have concerns. The last thing that we should be doing is minimizing the transparency with which we are passing bills. So again, I would ask for a green vote. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill, or on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 56 ayes and 72 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pugh moving to amend House File 2724, the first engrossment as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A7.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I'm disappointed with the last vote, and I was disappointed also with the vote on Representative Sanders' amendment. But now we as a body have a second chance to do the right thing. And I was encouraged that the vote just was defeated by simply 9 votes. And so I'm hopeful that a number of you will have had an opportunity to consider how important this is to offer transparency to our citizens and to make government more accessible to them, not more challenging, not to put more hurdles in front of them. What this amendment does, and I'll be brief, is this amendment moves to strike Sections 10, which is what we voted on with Representative Sanders' amendment, and also Section 12. And Section 12 speaks to the sonar. What I will do, I have taken a look at this, and I did submit this amendment because I'm very concerned about this. I think the Section 12 piece specifically decreases transparency, and it pulls the curtains back on Minnesotans. The impact in the language on all of the deletions, all of the verbiage that has been stricken is very concerning. And I'm certain that my more senior colleagues on both sides of the aisle understand how fantastic, having full amount of information is on which the agency can make decisions. And what this looks to do to me is to minimize the level of detail that the sonar would offer. And, it just doesn't seem to me that the same level, the same high degree, the high bar of justification needs to be put forth to justify what they're doing. So I would urge a green vote. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I again arise to oppose this amendment. Again, this is, other than adding Section 12 into it, it's the same amendment we voted down, the Sanders Amendment. And members, what this has done is the sonar over the years has become a rigid laundry list. You have to meet this, and this to have a statement of need and reasonableness. And that's what the sonar is. And it's going back to the original intent of the sonar of a statement of need and reasonableness. And members, just vote the same way you voted on the Sanders Amendment. Please vote no.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson stand for question?
He will. Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I've dealt with rules for the last 20 years with building code and fire code, all the construction codes. My question is that sonar developed over those years. Long period of time that sonar developed into what it currently is. Can you tell me why it has developed that way and why it didn't stay as simple as it was? Representative Nelson, and just educate us why it took that way and progressed and added all those things. There was a reason it added all those things, Representative Nelson. Can you tell us why?
Representative Nelson.
No, I cannot explain why it has gotten so rigid. But again, going back to the original reason for the sonar, it's when they're doing the rules, this is the reason we need them. It's a statement of why they need them, a statement of need and reasonableness. That's what the sonar is. And that shouldn't have to be so rigid to be done that way.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will tell you that the reason it got that way is because our sonars weren't very complete. So we had to list why exactly what all had to be in there. There's a good reason for that to be that way, is because that's how it developed and progressed. And so, members, I urge a green vote on this amendment because there's reasons why we ended up having it so rigid.
Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, and Representative Howell raised an issue here that reminded me, in fact, this whole debate has reminded me of a bill that I carried, I believe, 3 years ago. And we worked very hard at making it a bipartisan bill with help and assistance from Representative Simon, Representative Nelson, Representative Winkler, as I carried a rulemaking bill that was an enormous amount of work. First of all, kudos to you, Representative Nelson. I see your bill had one little old committee stop and came straight to the floor. Mine had nine committee stops, where every one of these things was debated at length, and I think probably should have been. Every agency that was affected insisted, by the administration's efforts, that the bill come to the Committee of Jurisdiction so that we could hear their complaints about how onerous this was and how much it was going to cost the agency to comply with a few little things that we insisted that were basically along the lines of transparency and, most importantly, to restore legislative authority and oversight over the rulemaking process. Now, sometimes it's important that rulemaking process be given to agencies with experts. We don't want to be debating things that we probably are beyond our capabilities and our educational understanding when it comes to something highly technical. Unfortunately, there has been a propensity over the years for the legislature to punt, to hand this stuff off to the agencies and short-circuit the process. So, Representative Nelson, you'll remember, and all of those that helped from the DFL side of the aisle, that by the time my 30-some page bill hit its 9th station stop, it was down to about a 6-page bill, and it only basically had two components left. One was that the sonar had been developed, the certificate or statement of need and reasonableness had been refined and developed into what we have here in Section 5, and we were all good with that because that protected in some detail the people, the enterprises, and the entities that were going to be affected by the rules that we were handing off. And then, oh, by the way, the agencies had to notify the committees of jurisdiction, including the ranking minority members, of all the rules that they were going to propose in a coming year to either implement or declare obsolete and delete. Members, the bill had, in my mind and in my heart, had its genesis in an unusual and serendipitous moment that I had down in the state of Florida. My mother-in-law lived near Tallahassee, and the fall that she was dying, there was a special election or special session at the State House, and I happened to be down there. So I went over to see the special session, which was a veto override session, bipartisanly drawn, to override 10 bills that Governor Christ had vetoed that the legislature had passed. The first bill they vetoed the veto override on was the Regulatory and Rulemaking Reform Bill. This bill. Actually, it was the bill I carried 3 years ago. And it asserted, because of some overreach by Florida agencies, that legislators could actually go protest a rule and bring it into committee as a legislative initiative. Tell the agencies they had to make it a bill. They just couldn't make it a rule. I wanted that. I wanted that for us. I thought it was a reasonable request. So basically, I brought that bill here and introduced it. Whoa, what a firestorm it got from the agencies. It turns out they're very jealous of their ability to make rules and keep them away from us. So after 9 stops, again, I applaud you, Representative Nelson, for doing one. After 9 stops, we whittled it down to what we could get bipartisan support on, which was this expanded certificate or statement of need and reasonableness and the notifications of the minority members. I'm sorry to see that your bill whittles that sonar provision down, Representative Nelson, so I guess I say all that, members, to say this. Please support this amendment, which will put back some of that work we did 3 years ago and make it possible for some of us bipartisanly to support the bill in the end should this statement go back in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I really appreciate the feedback that we just heard, and again, the sharing of institutional knowledge and expertise from Representative Beard and Representative Gunther. I mean, this bill, this is an agency bill, and it should definitely be bipartisan. It's so disappointing that, it's so disappointing that it doesn't appear to be. And it would be bipartisan, in my opinion, and I know that many share this, if the agencies hadn't overreached in such a big way, such a swing from what we heard Representative Beard tell us about how this process, this really important process of lawmaking used to work, and how Representative Gunther told us the same thing. So I think I'll just leave it at that. I would strongly encourage a green vote, and I'd appreciate a roll call. Thank you.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I would agree that sonars at this point are refined and developed. They're also unread because they're way too long and have become useless because nobody reads them anymore. And I say that as somebody who has read sonars and sees that we're spending much too much time following a law that became too complex and is now outdated. So I would urge members to vote no.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pugh, moving to amend House File 2724, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A8.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this one is really easy. It's very straightforward. What this is doing is simply reinserting stricken language, and it appears on page 9, lines 21 through 26, that the mailed notice must include either a copy of the proposed rule or an easily readable and understandable description of its nature and effect, and an announcement that a free copy of the proposed rule is available upon request from the agency. In addition, each agency shall make reasonable efforts to notify persons or classes of persons who may be significantly affected by the rule being proposed by giving notice of its intention in newsletters, newspapers, and other publications or through means of communication. I was very surprised to see that that was stricken. There are so many of our citizens don't have access to email, maybe not so many, but enough, some, and so many of us, like myself, who are inundated with email to the point where my email box at times doesn't even receive anymore. And I think that this is not at all an unreasonable request to have a hard copy available upon request. And I would ask for a green vote, and I would appreciate a roll call.
Roll call requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Nelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Again, at the beginning, I said this was brought to us as part of the unsession, but I don't consider this an unsession bill. But this amendment goes against the unsession bill because this language that is being asked in this amendment to be put back in is already in the bill. It's just been moved. It's moved. The mail notice language is now in lines 10.3 to 10.4. The additional notification language is consolidated into lines 14, or is it consolidated 14.15 on lines 6.1 to 6.11. So the language is there. It's just been moved. It's not been stricken and taken away. So again, in the spirit of the unsession, this would just be adding in redundant language, and so let's not do this amendment. I say vote no.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I appreciate that feedback. I think with all of the other verbiage that we're striking from statute, that language that hasn't been used in 20 years, this is clarifying language. And I don't know why we would strike it. Yes, it might be in other parts. Mr. Speaker, if I could ask if the author of the bill would yield for a question.
He will. Representative Pugh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, I'm wondering if I took my roll call away, could we leave this language? Would you give consideration to leaving this 6 lines of language in the bill to help clarify for citizens of Minnesota?
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, no, because the language is already there. It's just the part where it's been deleted. It's just being reinserted in another place, and so the language is still there. To have it in twice, it makes it redundant. And this is part of, again, this is where this part of it I would consider unsession, is that we're just trying to streamline the process. It's already in the bill. It's already going to be in law. It's not going away. The notification's all there. So whether there's a new roll call or not, we should vote no on this and move on to the next amendment.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is part of the problem with this bill. The most frustrating thing, I've been looking at this bill since before session when we began meetings, and the biggest problem with this bill is it's almost impossible to follow these unsession bills and what they're doing. Things are moved to different sections. A word is changed here or there. Representative Nelson, I know you pointed where I think you said something about line 6.1 to 6.11. That is not the same language. This is not the exact same language. And the agencies will lead us to believe that this is, we're just moving this or that to another section. But a word here or a word there makes a really big difference. And I looked at the lines that you gave me, Representative Nelson, and you said part of it's here, part of it's there. That's the problem. We don't exactly know what's happening. It's very unclear, and for that reason, even if it is somewhere in here, I think we should vote for this amendment, because I think it's very easy for the agency to pull the wool over our eyes and rewrite a word here or there so that we don't know what it does. Members, I ask for a green vote for the Pugh amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion say, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this amendment. And Representative Nelson, what you stated, no, I need that, so thank you. What you stated as far as making things easier and more understandable to read in lines 10.1 and then 6.1, that makes it actually a lot more confusing, especially, and it contradicts what the governor has on his website. And if you'll indulge me, I'll read this to you. On the governor's website, he puts in rulemaking reform, and he says this: state agencies are responsible for writing the rules that implement and enforce new laws. Currently, the process for writing those rules is slow and complex. That's why you have this bill, Representative. Governor Dayton is proposing reforms to the rulemaking progress that will make the process faster and easier to understand while protecting the public's right to participate and providing the opportunity for independent legal review. As I look at the amendment before us to reinstate those lines that make it very clear and readable and understandable and easy to read for the general public, as the governor wants to do, and he states on his website, yours doesn't do that. It makes it more complex, less understandable, less easier to read, and it dilutes it. So by putting this in, it'll be right in line with the Governor Dayton's rulemaking process regulation that he wants to put in. So I really ask you, Representative, that you reconsider the amendment, because if you do not, you're contradicting your governor, who wants to make the rule process a lot easier. And I'm sure you don't want to disappoint your governor. Vote green, please.
There is a roll call on this, members. Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to clarify that my request to strike my roll call was rejected, and so I do want a roll call. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll. Clerk will close the roll. There being 56 ayes and 72 nays, the motion has not prevailed. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pugh, moving to amend House File 2724, the first engrossment, as follows. The amendment is coded A9.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this is the second to last amendment that I have, so I know a number of you might be happy about that. This amendment deals with Section 18, and specifically with regard to not only the number of requests, but the quality and the requirements for those letters, the correspondence, in order to hit the threshold to be accepted to consider a hearing. And the first piece was, we passed that, but the second piece of this amendment reinstates the right of individuals to simply say that they oppose the entire rule. And it eliminates the requirement that people list each part. Well, it's not that they list all of the specifics and write the reasons for the objection to each portion, each component of that rule. And so I would ask for a green vote again on this particular amendment. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We've already lowered the number throughout the bill from 50 to 25 with an earlier amendment. And this amendment actually, if the other amendment hadn't been done, this amendment doesn't hit all the spots. So if we had passed this amendment, we would have had parts where you had to have 50 and parts where you had to have 25. And as I stated earlier, the reason why they're asking for, give me a reason why you oppose the rule, again, goes back to what I said earlier. You have an ugly house. Well, why is my house ugly? Well, because it's purple, and I'm a Green Bay Packer fan, and I don't want a purple house next to me. You know, you need to have a reason so that they can try. The reason they want that is so that they can try and figure out, okay, what can we do? Can we work it out? Can we fix this rule so that there's no objections to it? Without that feedback, they don't have the ability to do that. And I think any of us, if we could get criticism on anything, we want to be able to know what the criticism is so we can work on fixing that so the criticism's not there. Please vote no on the bill, on the amendment, the A9 amendment.
Representative Pugh. See no further discussion. All those in favor of the amendment say aye. All opposed, no. No. Motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pugh moving to amend House File 2724, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A10.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is my last amendment, and I know you're disappointed. And it applies to Section 16 on page 11, the Notice of Proposed Adoption of Rules. And I think what I'll do is I'll just ask for your green vote, and I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I oppose this amendment. Again, like the last amendment, it doesn't add back the 50 to 25 in all the places, and it just messes with the rest of the bill. So please vote no.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to request a roll call. This would definitely enhance, again, the transparency and accessibility of government to our citizens, and it is what they deserve from us. Thank you.
There are 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. Bly votes no. There being 56 ayes and 72 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2724 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the bill yield to a question, please?
He will. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, I'm trying to figure out why Section 19 has been revised. This is when the adoption of the proposed rule goes to the administrative law judge, and I see there are several changes. The resubmission subdivision 2 is deleted, and then there is a harmless error section added, and then the correction of defects also has some new language. Could you walk us through why that was necessary? What has been the experience in submitting to an administrative law judge that would cause the desire for this new language and deletion of some of the old language when there's disapproval and approval?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I didn't quite understand all you were saying, but this part of the bill and the whole bill as a whole, as we've gone through the process, if you saw the bill as it was originally put in, submitted, this has gone a long way We've pulled the agency back off the cliff on a lot of things. This part of the bill, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Representative Erickson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Nelson will yield again.
He will. Representative Erickson.
Well, Representative Nelson, Section 19 deals with submitting a rule when it hasn't gone through a hearing process to the administrative law judge. And there are a lot of changes made, and so I'm wondering why this had to occur. What were the problems that forced these changes? Maybe it's just reform, I need to know, but the harmless error is rather interesting. So I wanted you to explain to us why that occurred.
Representative Nelson.
Can you tell, I guess, can we get, where the harmless error? I'm trying to find it here in the Section 19. A lot of Section 19 is moving language around, and it's the same language as there, the harmless error. Oh, I see it here on the top of page 15. Hang on a second. It's, Mr. Speaker and Representative Erickson, that's harmless error. If you look, it's being moved from 16, page 16 to the subdivision 4, and it's being titled harmless error, but it's the same language that is on 16.3 to 16.10 is just being moved to 15.1 to 15.8. It's the same, it's existing language, it's just being moved in the bill. Again, in this section, some stuff's being moved around to make it flow better, to read better.
Representative Howe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess I've been, as I said, involved in rulemaking, and I've always said that I don't like the legislature passing rules that work with construction codes, because I think the rulemaking process is a good process and gets a lot of public input. And it's an arduous process, I understand that, but the reason it's an arduous process is to make sure it's good, and you got a good product at the end. And I think our building codes and our fire codes are good examples of that. Our plumbing code, our mechanical code, all of those are good examples of what comes out of the rulemaking process. And now we're changing it. And we're going to give the agency less sunshine, less visibility from the public. We're going to make it more difficult for the public to see what goes on. And I guess now you're going to change my point of view that maybe that rulemaking process is a good process, and maybe we do have to bring it back into the legislative process where I, for years, have always said it doesn't belong. Members, I hope that we vote this thing down, because I don't believe this is going in the right direction. I believe this is absolutely in the wrong direction. I think it is going to hurt the development process in the rulemaking process. I think it's going to pull the shutters and darken the room. And I think that's bad. Members, defeat this bill.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson yield to a few questions?
He will. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, I had a few remaining questions, and I'll start on page 5.31. It says, the agencies may inquire as to whether the persons on the list in paragraph A wish to remain on it, so folks who want to be notified, and may remove persons from whom there is a negative reply or no reply within 60 days. So these are people that are emailed about rules that may affect them. What is the purpose of removing them from the list, keeping in mind that you can basically have an email list that has thousands of names on it with no additional effort? What is the point of doing that? How is that helpful to the average person?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just like when we do mailings from our mail list, sometimes people move, sometimes people die, sometimes people decide they no longer care about that subject and don't want to be notified anymore. That's what this is about. The agencies will notify the people, we got these rules coming up, do you want to remain on the list or not remain on the list? It helps them clean up their list. So they don't get a bunch of bounce backs or email address if you're talking email addresses that are no longer valid. So that's what it's about. It's, from time to time, we go through and we clean up lists all the time, and that's what it's about.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Nelson. Well, if you don't get a bounce back but no one replies within 60 days, they can take you off the list. What's wrong with the person emailing the agency and saying, I don't wish to be on the list anymore? This takes away the power of the people to be notified. Who knows why people may not be checking their email, or may have missed it, or maybe they have an assistant who accidentally deleted it, or maybe they had a tragedy in their life and they didn't get to check it. What we should be doing is having the people say, look, I don't want to be on this list anymore, the issue doesn't affect me. So I think that is a wrong way to go in this. My next question, Representative Nelson, is Section 9, lines 6.25 to 6.32. And that eliminates language that says that the agency has to notify the authors of the bill granting the rulemaking authority. And this gets at something I think Representative McNamara pointed out a little bit ago, the legislative intent. If the legislature passes a bill granting rulemaking authority, and let's say I'm carrying a bill that says this agency is going to get rulemaking authority, what this tells me is that the agencies don't want to tell me what they're doing to implement the rulemaking authority that we granted them. They don't want to implement it because they don't want the legislature to know what they're doing. So I find this really troubling. What is the purpose, you believe, in not notifying the very authors of the rules that the agencies are supposed to implement? What's the purpose of that?
Representative Nelson.
First, the previous question you had, it was after I spoke, that rule notification that you're talking about, your previous question on page 5, that's actually existing law that's just being stricken from another part of the bill and moved to that section. So that's existing law that we were talking about, the removing of names from lists. So that's existing law that's just being moved to another part of the statute. As far as the notifying the authors, that information is now going on the reviser's webpage, so it's there electronically so everybody can see it, and it makes it easier for them, it makes it easier for us to track the rulemaking process.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Nelson. No, it doesn't make it easier, because I don't believe there's one member in this body who goes on to the website to track every single rule. There's a reason that we're notified when things change. And if you're authoring a bill, or any of us are authoring a bill and are working on a bill asking the agencies to implement rulemaking, we should expect that they're going to tell us how they're implementing the rules that we passed, because they need to know the legislative intent. It is absolutely wrong to take that out and to expect legislators to go and see if the agencies are implementing the rules appropriately. Yes, I guess you could say that it's our job to go and to check, but that's not how it's been done around here. Normally, in virtually anything we've done, we always get notice. At least the leads of committees get notice. And at the very least, the authors of somebody granting rulemaking authority ought to be able to easily look back and see what's happening and how the agencies are implementing the rules. By not doing that, again, you're taking away transparency. They might be implementing things that the legislature never intended. They might be interpreting it completely wrong, and that's why currently we have that. So it can go back to the legislature, and that the legislature can look at it and say, oh, this isn't what we meant. This isn't what we meant to do. So I think that's wrong. And Representative Nelson, about the other section, I looked through the bill. I don't know where it is in the bill, and that's a big problem with this bill. Things are moved from here to there, and we're led to believe that we're supposed to take the agency's word that it's in statute somewhere. Perhaps you can, be more specific on that, but we've heard that a couple of times tonight. Or today. This language is somewhere else. I think that's troubling that we're having a hard time following it. Representative Nelson, my next question is on page 12. On line 12.32, the statement of need and reasonableness must include the information required instead of analysis. What is the purpose of taking away an analysis and instead just providing information? How is that helpful to the average citizen?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm being told here that that's to simplify the sonar. Instead of having the analysis on there, this is the information, and that's what it's about. It doesn't take away any transparency.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Nelson. Well, I disagree with you. There's a difference between information and analysis. Analysis requires a thorough investigation and actually having to use a formula to give us why something may be good or bad. Information is just plopping the stuff down. So basically, again, this is a lack of transparency. So it's very discouraging that the agency would move forward with this and that you would accept it. And just kind of taglining on that, I'd like to go to Section 8. Section 8, you delete 1 through 6 of the section on statement of need and reasonableness, and then you rewrite it. And there's, I guess you can say that some of it's the same, but if you look at it very carefully, members, I encourage you to look at very carefully lines 8.1 to 8.16, and then look at the lines that replace it, and those lines are 8.17 to 8.22. Some of the words are the same, but some words are missing. Subtle words, a word here or there, but they have meaning. These words have meaning. Words that are missing, Representative Nelson, and maybe you can tell me why this is important. You took out the need for them to provide a description of alternative methods for achieving the purpose of the proposed rule. So you don't want the agency to tell the people of Minnesota other alternatives than the rule that they've proposed. I also notice that the words on line 8.14, consequences of not adopting the proposed rule. So the agencies no longer have to say what would be the consequences, if there are any, of adopting the proposed rule. And finally, another one I see on line 8.6 is a determination of whether there are less costly methods. So they're not going to provide if there's any alternative methods. They don't have to provide if there's any less costly methods. Members, I don't know how this helps anybody except for the agencies get more power. And I don't know why anybody would want to succeed that much power to the agencies. The agencies do great work. I don't doubt that. But we're the ones that are elected and held accountable to the people. They do have the ability to make rules, to implement rules, but those rules have the force of law. And when we're not granting oversight or having oversight over them, it's very difficult to hold them accountable. Members, in closing, I'm going to give you just a few reasons why I think you should vote against this. First, it makes it more difficult for the average citizen to stop bureaucrats from essentially writing their own laws. Again, they can make rules and implement rules, but it's based on what we're directing them to do. When we're not directing them, they have no way of knowing. They're not accountable to the people, to the electorate. Number two, it lets bureaucrats decide what's controversial and what's not controversial. Again, they don't have any way of knowing. They're sitting in an office in St. Paul. They don't have any way of knowing what's going on in Hibbing or Red Wing or Laverne or anywhere, because they're not affected by the rules. So they may think it's not controversial, but that doesn't mean it's not controversial to the people that it's affected by. The third reason, it bypasses the legislature. That part about the 18 months is really important, because what it does is it allows them to wait until the tides change, until maybe the Democrats lose control and the Republicans are in control, and maybe the Republicans are more favorable to it. Or maybe it allows them to wait. Maybe they don't want it. They want to wait until the legislature is not in session so that they can implement the rule in June that they think is going to be controversial by the legislature. That's problematic. I think probably most importantly is that this reduces transparency. This makes it more difficult to receive notice of when rules can affect you. It makes it more difficult as a common citizen to make a change. And members, for those reasons, I really, really hope that you'll consider not being part of the team. I understand the agency wants this. I get that. I don't believe that, however, that this is what Governor Dayton really meant when he talked about his unsession. This all started out as we're going to get rid of redundant language, and we're going to just get away with things that just the stuff that we can all agree to and the obsolete language. This is far, far, far greater than that. By voting for this, members, you really are voting to get rid of your authority and to give your authority to unelected bureaucrats in St. Paul. Maybe that's okay if you represent St. Paul and Minneapolis, but do you really want to do that if you live in outstate Minnesota? Do you really want to give that power and to go back to your people, your constituents, and say, well, gee, the bureaucrat in St. Paul said this was non-controversial, so I don't see why you think it's controversial. This is just a bad bill, members. I strongly encourage a no vote. Thank you.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the bill yield?
He will. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, I've heard this referred to by some as an unsession bill. I don't know if that was you or someone. I looked at the fiscal note, at least the cover page of the fiscal note. It looks like it grows the cost of government over the next 3 years by $1.5 million and increases FTEs by about 3 FTEs. Can you explain to us if we are spending more money and hiring more people, how this becomes an unsession bill? They seem rather incongruent.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members and Representative Drazkowski, that part of the bill where the fiscal note was deleted out of the bill in committee, that had to do with setting up the bill as it was originally written, was setting up a new function in the revisor's office that the revisor said we'd love to do this. Again, they have a beta system that they created on their own that we've been using that tracks the rulemaking process. But to do what the bill originally intended to have done would have taken a more robust system than what they created on their own, and they would have had to do that. That's what the cost was. That's what the FTEs are about. We took that portion out of the bill. The revisors have said that we would love to look at that and develop that system, but we can't afford to do it now, and so that part of the bill is gone. And so the fiscal note that you're talking about is not there. The FTEs are not in this bill. That part's gone. As to people calling it unsession bill, some people have called this. It came out of the unsession, on the unsession meetings that the governor had. From the governor's office this bill came from, but I said from the beginning of my remarks, I don't consider this an unsession bill. It's more substantial than what the unsession bills have been.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Radinovich yield for a question?
Yes, he will. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Radinovich, we've been listening to the debate here. Obviously, we got a bill before us that grants the government more power and takes power away from the people, takes ability away from the people to participate in a process in which agencies have the ability to develop rules that carry the force and power of law to directly impact, and many times punitive ways, the citizens of our districts. So, Representative Radinovich, have you heard from anybody in your district that would like to give up their power and have the government become bigger so that they could become smaller?
Representative Radinovich.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Drazkowski, I've been sitting here listening to debate. I didn't have this bill come through any of the committees that I serve on, and I think that's probably a pretty common thing for a lot of the legislators here. So, I've been listening to debate. I've been listening to Representative Nelson's points. I find them to be generally well taken. And I don't know that I agree with your characterization of what this bill does. And, as we've been passing legislation from this body, I think my latest count said that 92% of the bills that were passed over the last 2 years were done with at least one vote in bipartisan support. And of all those bills that we passed, the vast majority haven't had any public comment, from my district. And so I'm more than happy to just sort of sit here and listen to the debate and listen to the points being made on either side. But I anticipate that I'll probably vote in support of this bill. Thank you.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Radinovich. I heard no, and no one from my district has wanted to cede more power to the state government, as is included in this bill that you're about to vote for, either. And I wonder what the citizens of my district and your district will think about this legislature passing a bill that is going to give the DNR the ability to more quickly, with less citizen input, promulgate more rules upon the people of our districts to do things to them. And that's what we're doing here today with this bill, Representative Radinovich. And I would ask you to reconsider your position on the bill, because if your constituents are anything like mine, they believe with the arguments that I and some others, rather than those of Representative Nelson in his support of the growing government, have been making. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if Representative Seltzer would yield.
She will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Seltzer, have you heard anything from the people in your district that would like to give, say, the Department of Education the ability to come in and more quickly, with less input from your citizens, from your teachers, your administrators, your parents, and other people, the ability to make rules that carry the force, power, and effect of law, to give the department the ability to impose those rules upon your citizens? Have your people asked for this bill?
Representative Seltzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Drazkowski. I agree with Representative Radinovich that I don't agree with your interpretation of this bill, and actually this bill will streamline some portions of our rulemaking, giving more accountability to agencies, to the legislature, by not allowing them to just wait us out for 18 months and let mandates on rulemaking expire. And I'm also very happy that we adopted Representative Pugh's amendment, which will give the people more power and reinstates the existing requirement that if 25 or more people submit a written request for a public hearing, that public hearing will be held. So I am happy with the provisions in this bill and will be supporting it.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Seltzer. And your deflection of the question, similar to that of Representative Radinovich, indicates to me that that's a no for you, too. And as a matter of fact, if you've been listening closely to the debate and reading the bill, there's less accountability to government included in this bill, and less opportunity for citizens to hold their government accountable as it continues to grow its power and influence upon people in the over 100 different state agencies that are listed on the peach-colored paper that Representative Pugh passed around. Members, once again, I don't hear the people of Minnesota asking for us to give our state government more. In many cases, as I look at that section that I had the intense discussion with Representative Nelson about unbridled authority in this instance to make their interpretation of what non-controversial means and then impose those requirements, those forces of law that can be punitive upon our particular citizens. I am not hearing that in the voices of the people of Minnesota. Rather, this appears to be a bill coming forward brought from the government to give it and cede itself more power, and we see the codependency of those pushing this bill in making that happen. So, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if Representative Earhart would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Earhart, I don't know how closely you've been listening to discussion. I see you flailing your arms around. But what we're seeing here is a bill.
Not appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Earhart, what are the people of your district saying about this bill? Are they asking for you to vote for a bill to give more power to the government and less power for them? In one good example, I think, given the dynamics of your district in Edina, that the Metropolitan Council is going to be granted even more authority to create their own rules carrying the force of law to impose them upon the people of Edina. So I'm wondering if they have been asking for this bill to pass here today.
Representative Earhart.
Well, Mr. Speaker and Representative Jaskowski, I'm not sure what your question is, but I wish you'd tell me what the dynamics are in Edina. Then I could explain to you what your question is about, or the answer to it. So you tell me what the dynamics are in Edina, for starters, if you would. Please yield to that question.
Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wondering if Representative Earhart would yield again.
He will yield. Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Earhart, I asked you the question about your district. And if you asked a question about my district, I could help you out. But it seems to me, given the location of Edina and the influence that the Metropolitan Council would have upon the area of your district, I would think that people might be concerned about us ceding more authority to state government to impose more things, more requirements, and extract more freedoms from them. So, Representative Earhart, is anybody asking you to support this bill? Are you hearing from your constituents in Edina? Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But what I heard you say originally, given the dynamics of the in my district, what is the result of that? And I want you to tell me what the dynamics are in my district as you see them, so that I can respond properly to what you would like to hear.
Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And a non-answer there suggests, too, that the answer I would expect is probably no, that Representative Earhart, that you probably are not hearing from your constituents as I am not hearing from mine to cede the power of the people even further to the state governments. But thank you. And Mr. Speaker, wondering if Representative McNamara would yield.
Representative McNamara will yield. Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McNamara, are you hearing from the people in your district? Are they interested in seeing us support and pass this bill here today that could give the Department of Agriculture new powers that they could accumulate at a speed upon which they have never been able to accumulate before?
Representative McNamara.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Jaskowski, I have heard nothing.
Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative McNamara. And that's, in my agriculture and rural district, that's the same. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Savick yield?
She will. Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Savick, do the people in your district want us to pass this bill to cede more of their individual authority and freedoms to a even larger and more aggressive government?
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Savick.
Yes. I have not heard anything from my district on this bill. Thank you.
Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Savick. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Sawatsky yield?
She is in conference committee. Representative Jaskowski.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members. Mr. Speaker, Representative Erickson would yield. Erickson S., I'm sorry.
Apparently she will. Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Erickson, are the people in your district wanting the Department of Education, the Department of Natural Resources, or any of the other 100-plus agencies of the state of Minnesota to have this new power to accumulate authority and impose it upon the people of Minnesotans?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Representative Jaskowski. You know, in the Lake Mille Lacs area, I can tell you how horrible rulemaking is for my constituency. We have fishing rules. We have wild rice rules. We have hunting rules. We have gathering rules. We have trapping rules. We have ATV rules. We have snowmobile rules. We have canoeing rules. We have state park rules. We have firewood rules. We have fireworks rules. We have snowmobile rules, and it goes on and on. And I tell you, the people who live around Lake Mille Lacs wonder what in the world it is that forces them to have to adhere to all these rules. So no, my people talk to me every day about the horrible rules and regulations that they have to face. So I don't know why anyone in this body would vote to adopt a law now that is going to make rulemaking perhaps sound like it's being reformed, but it's going to be more onerous. So thank you for asking.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Erickson, for your passionate iteration of what the people of Minnesota are saying, and in this case, aren't saying. The people of Minnesota, members, are not asking for this government gone wild bill that we see in front of us. They're not asking for it. None of the members that I talked to that yielded to questions had cited anybody from their district saying that they wanted this government to grow bigger and have less accountability to them, the people. Members, we are throwing the reins of government into the laps of the bureaucrats with this bill. This is the wrong direction, members. This bill is coming from government and growing it to impose it upon the people of Minnesota. Members, the people of Minnesota want the government to be accountable and to yield to what they would like to see happen to them. And this bill goes the other direction and tells the people of Minnesota that no, the government is going to grow stronger, have greater ability to grow and develop rules to impose upon them. Members, please join me in voting a solid red on this government gone wild bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, we've had a spirited debate on this bill. There's been some misrepresentation about what the bill does. I mean, currently we have our rulemaking process, the normal rulemaking process. We have the dual track process where if they think it may not be controversial, that they can switch over here. We have good cause exemptions. We have total exemption for rulemaking. We have emergency rulemaking. This bill is just adding an expedited rulemaking in there so that instead of going from the normal process to an emergency process that kind of bypasses us, or to a good cause exemption, this is a way of taking the least controversial, the most non-controversial pieces that are rules that they have to institute, and giving them a chance to get them done quicker so that we can make our government, the state of Minnesota, more efficient for the members of the citizens of the state of Minnesota. And members, remember, in this bill, there's safeguards. If the agency chooses the expedited process and there is a objection to that, it gets kicked back into the regular rulemaking process. So again, it's up to the government agencies when they go through this process, when they choose what route they want to take to do rulemaking, which they already can do, so we're not changing any powers they have, they pick the right process. And so members, this has been a well worked out bill. We've worked with the Chamber of Commerce, we've worked with business groups, we've worked with counties and cities and other groups out there to get their objections, to get them to agree to this. The language of the current bill is the agreed upon language, and we've worked with all the interest groups with. The amendment that Representative Pugh did, lowering the number to 25, like I said, it's not going to give me heartburn. Originally it was 100. I got them down to 50. I don't think it's going to hurt anybody, and I don't think it's going to make it more difficult for the agencies. So, members, this is a good bill. Please vote green.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. clerk will close the roll. Halverson votes aye. There being 73 ayes and 55 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed, as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 2047. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2047, the third engrossment, an act relating to health.
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm very pleased to be able to bring forward today the newborn screening bill. Senate File 2047 is a bill to attempt to restore the newborn screening program to more closely resemble the successful program that Minnesota had in place from 1965 to 2012. This bill is also in response to a study that was done by the Minnesota Department of Health entitled Newborn Screening Program Study on Comprehensive and Sustainable Long-Term Storage and Use that was published February 1st, 2014. That tiny blood spot that's done with a little prick on the heel of our babies that they receive in the hospital is used to test for 56 harmful or fatal disorders so that early treatment and intervention can put these children on the path to a healthy, happy life. Some of the disorders that we test for, some of the 56 are PKU, which I know the Speaker's family has some dealings with, congenital heart disease, hearing loss, sickle cell anemia, and many more. The blood spot card contains only the information about the mom and baby and the doctor that will help the staff interpret the test results and be able to contact the baby's primary care provider if more testing or follow-up is needed. Storage of the spots provides for follow-up on positive tests, for test calibration and quality improvement, and for the development of new tests, which are now going to be defined as part of the newborn screening program, so that more babies' lives can be saved. Members, in the year before I was elected to office, some changes to the genetic privacy statute were enacted, and they have had unintended consequences in our state. As a result of the changes in law and the resulting lawsuit, 1.1 million blood samples have been destroyed in the state of Minnesota without even notifying the families. We heard heart-wrenching testimony from Stacy Nugent, who lost her 2-year-old daughter, Paige, to sudden unexplained death in childhood. That grief is hard to fathom and every parent's worst nightmare. Stacy and her husband added another beautiful daughter, Presley, to their family and were understandably worried about Presley's vulnerability to similar undetermined health issues. Under the advice from their physician, it was determined that running some tests using both of their daughters' blood spots offered promise. Imagine her response to learn that just a day prior to her call to the Department of Health that every blood spot over 71 days old had been destroyed. Just imagine, without her consent or knowledge, her last hope was dashed. I want to thank her and others like her for their strength and willingness to share their stories so that others can be helped. Members, I'm going to describe to you a few things that are in the bill and perhaps some things that are not in the bill, and then I'll stand for questions. The bill before you seeks to expand the educational component required of the Department of Health to include childbirth education programs and beyond parents to include legal guardians. This is an expansion of the current education programs of the newborn screening program. The bill seeks to clarify the newborn screening program and differentiate it from research, which still requires written affirmative consent. And let me repeat that, members. Research requires written affirmative consent. We have included an additional opt-out option than is currently in law, and I've provided a handout that will be coming around, and we can talk about that if you have questions. But this way, parents who don't want to do private testing and they don't want long-term storage can now choose to have the test done at the hospital, but not have the results and spots destroyed beyond the time limits. And the time limits in the Senate version that we've picked up are the results will be saved for 2 years and the blood spots for 30 days following the test. We are removing the 71-day storage period and going back to past practice, which is indefinite storage. Saving newborn screening spots and test results are critical to saving lives and as part of your child's medical record, and we simply do not destroy our medical records. The bill does not change the current opt-out policy for newborn screening, nor does it change the need for affirmative consent for research. And I want to acknowledge that there are folks who have issues with opt-out, but that is currently our practice in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota has a history of having a robust newborn screening program that saved lives. Over 5,000 children are alive today, and adults, since 1965 when the program began. Our current law is a tremendous barrier to new test development. Members, the current law is not working for our children, their families, or for public health. If allowed to, it's likely the changes we've proposed to the program can save many more lives by adding additional tests to the screening panel. And Mr. Speaker, that's a quick overview of the bill, and I do have an amendment.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Norton moving to amend Senate File 2047, the third engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In talking with some of the members actually on both sides of the aisle, the question came up, can the blood spots be sold? And in fact, they cannot, but for comfort language for some folks who had this concern, I have an amendment that prohibits the sale of any blood spots, test results, or other data collected in the newborn screening program. And I urge your support.
Any discussion to the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of the amendment say aye. Oh, Representative Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, at first glance, it seems like a great amendment, but that's the problem with the nuances of these kinds of issues. The broad definition of research that's allowed without consent is anything related to newborn screening. By virtue of the fact that you're using a blood spot or a newborn screening test, any research will be related to newborn screening. And I'm not surprised that the advocates of this bill would support this amendment, because even those that are using it for commercial purposes or their own uses now will not have to provide any remuneration for that. So we heard on a radio program earlier, a couple months ago when this bill first came out, the horrors of having to pay for blood spots from California babies in order to continue research for Wilson disease. And in researching the standards in California, it's obvious to me that those parents in California had no knowledge or consent of their baby's blood being sold for that study. So while at first glance not having to pay for blood spots probably makes sense, the broad nature and definition of research in this bill provides little protection for other uses.
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me just say again, currently the practice has been and continues to be that there will be no sale of the blood spots, test results, or other data, and we are affirming that now with this amendment in law. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like a roll call on this amendment, please.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 127 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2047 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion of the bill. Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill kind of puts me in an odd spot, but before I get going, I want to thank Representative Norton. Although the bill we have today isn't perfect, I believe it's a step forward. And I also want to take a moment to thank Representative Holberg. In the just under 2 years that I've been a member here, Representative Holberg has been just an invaluable resource, obviously not just to me and not just to our caucus, but this entire body. And so thank you for that. Members, when I think about this bill, I think about December 18th, 1980. That was the day that my parents learned that their three-day-old baby wasn't the happy, healthy baby boy they thought they had. That's when my mom watched her newborn get ripped out of her arms, hustled through Mercy Hospital in Coon Rapids, loaded in the back of an ambulance, and that ambulance screamed towards Minneapolis to Children's Hospital. My parents followed that ambulance not knowing what would come next. And it was later that day that they heard the diagnosis that I, in fact, had a severe congenital heart defect. And what they were told in 1980 is that there is no chance in medical science today that your son will live to be older than 7 years old. And the doctors actually said, take your son home, treat him like you do your other two boys, and just know that your son Nicholas won't be on earth as long as he should be. Members, Minnesota has always been a leader in medical research and medical advancement. From the founding of the Mayo Clinic by the Mayo brothers to revolutionary heart surgeries invented by Dr. Lillehei at the University of Minnesota Hospital, to the birthplace of our medical device industry. Minnesota has consistently led the charge. The reason I'm so supportive of this bill is that in current law, in current state statute, it is written that forbids the Minnesota Department of Health to develop new tests and to develop new screening. Members, if there was a law that prohibited advancement in science, that said, Minnesota has done enough. We've advanced far enough. We've discovered all that we want to discover about medicine. If that law and those restrictions had been in place in 1980, many people wouldn't be here today. Members, I look at this as we've always been a leader, and we've never settled. And we've never said that enough is enough and that we can stop pushing forward. That's un-Minnesotan. We're better than that. We deserve better than that. We need to move forward. We need to get back on track and doing the research that saves lives. This is a pro-life bill. The research conducted and the newborn screening developed. We started with one test. We have over 50. 5,000 babies saved. I cannot imagine that as a body we would say, we've progressed enough. We're ready to stop. That's not the Minnesotan spirit. And so I urge you to vote green. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and forgive me in Representative Lesch's words, your eyes may start to roll back in your head, but these things are really, really important. And first of all, to make it very clear, I'm not speaking against the test. I'm not saying that the test isn't important. I'm not saying that I want babies to die. But what I am saying is this bill is not the bill that provides a balance. And we'll get to the actual language in the bill here in a minute, but I think we need to first have a little history of why we are sitting here today. And in fact, as we sat through that long discussion on the rules bill, I failed to, in my notes, make a chapter that there was also a rulemaking process in newborn screening that got thrown out before there was actually a Supreme Court decision. And where does this whole thing start? What is the whole problem? Where did it start? Well, you can blame Representative Kahn and I. It's our fault. We actually, nearly 10 years ago, started to become concerned about genetic privacy and the advances in medical science and what that meant for genetic privacy in the state of Minnesota. And for once, actually, we were maybe a little ahead of the curve and blazing some ground that other states hadn't gone on. And I think that's a good idea. And what happened was we put together a working group to advise the legislature on what the public policy should be around genetic testing and information. And this working group met for a year, and it involved people in the medical community, the law enforcement community, privacy advocates, and it was quite an extensive process, and they came forward with a report with a series of recommendations. As a result of that, we were able to put into effect the Minnesota genetic privacy law, and this is, at this point, this is where Representative Kahn and I kind of digress and take two separate roads, but how that bill was coded into law would later become central to a Minnesota Supreme Court decision commonly referred to as the Bearder case, and whether or not this genetic privacy standard applied to newborn screening. Also during this time, many of us were trying to get more accountability in the newborn screening program. Legislation failed to pass. The department actually went to rulemaking authority. The administrative law judge ruled that they did not have the authority to do what they wanted to do by rule. So this issue was bouncing back and forth. One session, I can't tell you which one, actually the speaker carried a bill. At one point, Governor Pawlenty contemplating destroying all the samples that were being held by the Department of Health. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of fighting, a lot of distrust. And so what ultimately happened was that this court case worked its way through, and we had the Bearder decision that basically applied the genetic privacy standards to the newborn screening law, which then resulted ultimately in the destruction of the test results and samples that Representative Norton referred to. Now, in the meantime, once that court decision came down, we knew that we had to enact legislation to govern the newborn screening program and many of the other functions of the Department of Health, because they, in many instances, did not have express authority given to them by the legislature to do what they were doing with their samples. And so we first tackled the newborn screening issue because that was the most pending, if you will, and we put into law what is currently in place, and which I believe passed unanimously in both houses. That particular year we didn't have time or the ability to deal with all the other issues, so we gave the Department of Health what we referred to as the one-year get-out-of-jail-free pass, and we put in a one-year law that stayed any accountability to the new standards as a result of the court case, and worked in that intervening year to get language passed to allow the Department of Health to have the express authority to do the public health programs that they were doing and avoid the negative consequences of the Bearder decision on their operations. And so once the Supreme Court ruling came down, then the Bearder case was kicked back to district court for remedies and results, and the destruction of the samples and test results was held during this period of time while we were working on these other things at the legislature. And last fall, once all the court proceedings around the Bearder case were finished, that's when the destruction of the samples occurred. As we sit here today, I find myself, again, really, really frustrated with the Department of Health. When the newborn screening law went into effect 2 years ago, they agreed that they would embark on a rigorous education program with the public, utilizing pediatricians, prenatal classes, pre-admissions at hospitals to inform parents of the newborn screening program, its importance, and to obtain consent for research beyond program operations. So we gave them the right to use the blood spots to calibrate machines, conduct the test, do quality control things, but anything beyond that, including new tests, would require consent. The Department of Health failed miserably in that agreement. And last year, in the Data Practices Omnibus Bill, the Senate had provisions which would have gutted the consent provisions for the newborn screening program. Representative Simon and others held the House position, did not allow the gutting of the consent provisions to occur in that omnibus bill, and the resulting compromise was the report that Representative Norton referenced that was sent to the legislature on February 1st of this year. In the intervening time, the Department of Health halted any efforts to go through this process of trying to get consent. And they also knew that at some point there would be a ruling on the destruction of the blood samples and the test, and they made no effort to contact or provide public research or outreach to the public to let them know that this was coming, and that if people in the public wanted their blood spots or test results to be saved, that they could do so by consent and contact the department. So we had the blood spots and the test results destroyed, and then the report was brought forth by the Department of Health. And Representative Norton talked about the relationship between this report and her bill. Well, her bill is not a department bill, and her bill does not reflect any of the options in total that are recommended in the report. And in fact, the options and the standards that are in her bill are far beyond what the recommendations or options provided in the report by the Department of Health. This indefinite storage issue, they had till 18. The indefinite storage of blood, there are only 4 or 5 states in the country that have indefinite storage of blood. And so to say that this reflects the Department of Health, no, it reflects the users, the researchers, the people that want access to this. And as you well know, whether it's any bill up here, you can have a room full of lobbyists that are highly paid with interests, and oftentimes the interests of the average citizen are not very fairly represented. And one of the components of this report from the Department of Health was to contact people involved in this issue and get their feedback on various issues. And if you look at the people that were consulted by the Department of Health, it's very heavily tilted towards researchers and people that use this information, and very little information or feedback from privacy advocates and people that study ethics and medical research, etc. So it's no surprise that the recommendations came as they were, but quite a surprise to me that the bill before us goes so far beyond what the Department of Health even recommended. So in front of you, you have a letter from the ACLU, and they actually oppose this bill, and they lay out some really concrete privacy concerns. So for those of you that don't want to take it from me, you should maybe perk up when Holberg agrees with the ACLU. But what's happened is that this is a movement across the country, and so the question here today is this bill balanced? Does it balance the privacy concerns of individuals and it still allow for the public health needs to be met? I will concede that the language that was enacted in the bill that allowed just for use of the blood spots for program operations and the need for consent for new test development was tight. And Representative Norton talked about how this bill would allow for new test development. Well, it basically will allow for anything. And that's the problem. Words matter in legislation. And so if you go to the actual language of the bill where they redefine the newborn screening program operations, if you go to page 3 of the bill and look on lines 24 and 25, they add in a permitted use of utilization of blood samples and test results for studies related to newborn screening, including studies to develop new tests. So by definition, that language would say that studies to develop new tests is a subset of what's being allowed for research. So the research without consent in this bill is expanded far beyond new tests. And some may say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, historically, we have had situations where newborn spots have been given to the military for database development. In that case, it involved mostly spots of minorities. We, of course, have had sale of the spots. Lots of cases across the country where uses went far beyond newborn screening. Now, Representative Norton told you that it would only be used to develop newborn spots, and I listened to the whole bill presentation on the Senate floor, and there was an amendment on the Senate floor to limit genomic sequencing of DNA from blood spots. And that amendment was voted down. And when you look at the language on page 3 of this bill and then you take and do some research, most recently in September of last year, the federal government put forth $25 million and divided among 4 institutions for studies of genomic sequencing using newborn spots. And given the broad definition in this bill, I contend that a federal study using newborn screening spots to look at genomic sequencing for newborn screening is related to newborn screening and allowed under this language without consent. Members, that's very dangerous. During the arguments in front of the Minnesota Supreme Court when the state attorney for the AG's office representing the Department of Health was arguing about the anonymity of samples, Supreme Court Justice Page adamantly challenged that assertion in that DNA is the most individually identifiable substance that we know of. And so before you today, I am asking for you to really consider as policymakers, where should that balance be? I believe that the language that describes a range of research that is allowed without consent, because it only says related to newborn screening, if you use a spot or you use a newborn screening test, that research is related to newborn screening, so there are no guardrails in this bill. Zero. None. A more narrowly construed definition would be very helpful and something that I think that would make sense. One of the problems with newborn screening in this long history is the swinging back and forth and non-continuity. Passage of this bill today will continue that process, because I assure you when the public wakes up and figures out the wide latitude that the Minnesota Department of Health has for the use of this, the blood spots and the test results, without their knowledge or consent, there's going to be concerns. Think back to last summer when the story started coming out about the NSA tracking cell phone locations and who you were calling, and the outrage over that. What is the public going to say when they find out that their newborn's blood was involved in a federal study involving genomic sequencing of their baby's blood without their knowledge and consent? We owe the public more than what this bill provides. One of the other things that should be of great concern is that there are very few choices for parents. The only choice that you have if you want to opt out is destruction. You're not even given the opportunity, if you don't want your baby's information to be used for research related to newborn screening, you don't even have the option to ask for the test results to be returned to you. Your only option is destruction. So when Representative Norton gives the story of the woman whose child passed, and then there was a sibling and they wanted to look at the test results, because you're either all in or all out in this bill, your only option is destruction. What kind of a choice is that? In a discussion with Senator Marty about this very issue, which I referred to as the Sophie's choice in the bill, I said to him, why are you denying parents that are concerned about privacy and do not want their blood used for research purposes, why are you not giving them the option to allow the health department to hold and store the information without research? And his comment, and I'm paraphrasing here, is basically that there was a public duty, that other children's blood was used to develop tests, and so if you benefited from the development of tests, then you should be all in with the tests and test results and blood spots being used for research. I disagree with that, and so do parents that have been surveyed. In 2008, at a conference on newborn screening, they presented research done at the University of Michigan. And when they asked parents about the use of newborn screening test results and blood for research purposes, 76% were unwilling, or 28% were unwilling to support it without consent. 28% unwilling to support without consent. With consent, the support skyrockets. It goes to 76%. With consent, 76% of the parents surveyed said they would consent to the use of this material for research. Members, we have a duty to not only reflect the will of the people and organizations that hire lobbyists and come up here, but we also have a duty to reflect the wishes of the average citizens. I shudder to think what's going to happen when the public, if this bill passes, wakes up and figures out how limited their choices are and how broad the discretion is of the Department of Health to use the test results and blood spots for a variety of research purposes without the knowledge or consent. I know it's hard to vote against your member. I know, Representative Zerwas, that you really care about the medical issues. But we, for once, in Minnesota, led the pack 10 years ago when we started working on genetic privacy standards in the state. We can do much better than this. We could expand the definition of research to include new test development and have language that prohibits genomic sequencing without consent, that prohibits distribution of the information to those that will benefit financially without consent. And really, this is the one that really concerns me. We should also be respectful of those parents that care about their privacy and not give them the choice of either destroying the blood sample and the test results, or making their child's information available for this broad definition of research. That's no choice. No choice at all. And so, members, I think we can do a lot better. I would really urge a red vote today.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, members, a lot of Representative Holberg's argument that you just heard relies on what I would consider a very strained interpretation of what the language of this bill says, and I don't believe that any court would interpret it the way she is putting it forward. And that goes back to this line 3.24, where the bill talks about the section that talks about that the blood samples and test results can be used for studies related to newborn screening. The very next section talks about for research that they would need, I'm just paraphrasing here, but that written consent would be needed for research. And I think that Representative Holberg's argument bootstraps into the section on doing new tests. It bootstraps in there the idea that this is research and suddenly everything is open for research without written parental consent. But if you take that interpretation, you simply would be ignoring the section B here that talks about other studies requiring written consent. So I think a lot of her argument depends on that. I think that a court would be very hard-pressed to have that kind of an interpretation, which is not to say that there couldn't perhaps be a little bit more clarity in the language, and I think there probably is still an opportunity for that. However, I just cannot imagine the way this bill is written that would be interpreted to mean that there are no stops on the way this data can be used. Members, we deal with a lot of very difficult data issues on this floor. And I think all of us share a concern about how personal data is used and that it be used properly and with limits. But when you're asking a question about how data should be used, you have to balance on the one side the importance of having and using that data. I think this bill makes very careful distinctions and does give parents control, more control than they have in fact under current law. And I think that Representative Norton will probably speak to that a little bit more. But as much as I also consider myself a guardian of personal data and privacy, I think that this program is very important, and I think that this bill writes very good safeguards and very good fences around the way this data can be used. And in order to, parents can opt out, and without written parental consent, the only use for this data is for developing further tests and other things that are closely related to the newborn screening program.
Representative Kahn.
Yes, Mr. Speaker and members, Representative Holberg left one other name important in the genetic privacy issue out of the discussion, and that was Representative Smith, who facilitated everything that we did in this case. And of course, I felt badly about that law ever since the Bearder decision. The Bearder decision was a 4-3 decision of the Minnesota Supreme Court with a superb dissent written by Justice Paul Anderson on the difference between a sample and data. If we had had the interpretation, the Bearder decision, after only PKU sampling was in place, the health of Minnesota children and children throughout the world would be very much impaired. This is what I would specifically say is that consent, informed consent with the ability to opt out is informed consent. And we can have some discussions about exactly what the Department of Health should be telling people about the uses and so forth, but I very strongly support the Norton bill, and I do think that the issues that are being raised by Representative Holberg are really counterproductive to the health of children and the health of people, not only in Minnesota, but frankly throughout the world.
Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the science that was presented and the potential that can be done with the data and information on our children who are born in this bill, the science is amazing. It's unbelievable. I consistently marvel at the talent of our researchers, our universities, our physicians, and the things we're able to do for our kids today compared to what we were able to do just 10 years ago is incredible. And I, along with the proponents for this bill, marvel at what we've done, and I'm incredibly hopeful for what we can yet do. But in hearing about this, now you all know I'm not a scientist, and I don't necessarily have a scientific mind. I just look at this from the bleachers and say, wow, look at those scientists go. It's pretty impressive. But I am a lawyer. I know a little bit about the history of the laws of this country and the Constitution, and I'm an amateur historian because I love it. I love reading it. And I remember, and this came to my mind today significantly because many of you saw my daughter Alice on the floor here last night for the State of the State. She's 13, and in 2 months we're going to take her for the first time for her first trip to Washington, D.C. And we're going to take her around to see all the sites and the memorials and the Smithsonian. I always remember the Smithsonian. I like the Air and Space Museum the best. The big airplanes hanging from the ceiling, and the theater that we saw, the blast off of Columbia there back in the early 80s. And she's about the same age that I was when I first went there. And I'll never forget my first trip to the Museum of American History. And I remember a picture that I saw, and I asked my dad what it meant, because it was a picture on the wall of a sign that was put up in the 1930s in the southern states. It was either Alabama or Mississippi. And the sign said on it, "Some people are born to be a burden on the rest." And I didn't understand what that sign meant. It didn't make any sense to me. And my dad had to explain, well, there was a time in this country where many people thought that science was so good that we could effectively use science to root out the negative genetic qualities of individuals who were becoming a burden on our healthcare system. And I didn't understand it back then. And I didn't understand that within 10 years of that movement in the United States, it would become so popular, not just in the United States, but globally, that it would be the fanfare of a party in another country that would use that message and that principle to start a world war. That is the roots of the World War. Now, there are only 6 people in this chamber. I just looked at the statistics online. There are only 6 people in this chamber who were born before World War II. And the United States victory in World War II really helped us to rethink what was going on with that very, very popular theme across the United States of America pre-World War II. Because this was the time when marriage laws were passed to prohibit the breeding of individuals, and I don't think I wrote the words down here, but that had less than desirable traits, because they would produce offspring that would have to be taken care of. Connecticut passed the first one in 1896. A sterilization bill came before the Michigan legislature in 1897. They started coming up all over the country. One was finally passed in Indiana in 1907. Washington, California, and other states followed. Now, I have heard the proponents say, you know what, don't be paranoid. It's not going to happen. In fact, I heard one member say, I can never imagine a court ruling and allowing this kind of information to be used in such a horrific way. But yet, in fact, the United States Supreme Court in 1927, in a case called Buck versus Bell, validated the forced sterilization, in the words of the court, of mentally retarded adults in a home in Virginia, based upon genetic information. Now, proponents for the bill will say that's not going to happen. Nobody wants to do that. And in fact, the retention of the data itself will not lead to the usage of the data in that way. Anyone I've ever asked about this bill, I've asked, is there anything that you can say that would guarantee me that the data would not be used in this way? And of course you can't. You can't guarantee that. It's an unreasonable expectation I would have to ask that to be guaranteed. But they can say, just look at the way we're using this data today. Look at these scientists and what they're doing. They're doing amazing things. And I agree. It's phenomenal. And this bill is going to pass today, frankly, amendment-free. I'm not necessarily sure that it's a bad thing that the bill is going to pass, because I think proponents are right when they say that we can save many, many lives. But I hope that as we pass this bill today and we marvel at our own magnificence and scientific accomplishment, that we also keep in mind the immortal words of George Santayana, who said, "Those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it."
Further discussion. Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to comment. Representative Liebling, if you go on to look at that section of the bill that you referenced, it says, other than those studies described in paragraph A. So I'm worried about the Mack truck problem in section A of the bill that related to newborn screening, including developing new tests. So that would indicate that developing new tests was a subsection of research related to newborn screening. That's my concern, that it's very broad.
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the discussion that we're having here, but I do want to follow up on a couple things that have been said. The first is, I agree with Representative Holberg's concern that the department has perhaps not done as much outreach and education as we may have wanted. And so in the bill this year, we have strengthened that component, and I think it behooves all of us to make certain that the department follows through with those changes. I think I want to address first the newborn screening program study and the comments that were made. Yes, we did not they have three options in this study that the committee put together: option 1, option 2, and option 3. And there were problems with all of those, and those were noted in the study. And so this is a hybrid of options 2 and options 3. So I do want to say it is not a strict, and they didn't write a bill in there, by the way. They just had some components of what a good bill would be, their suggestions. And frankly, I also want to point out that they were very clear that option 1 was bad for the state of Minnesota, and option 1 is keeping the law as it currently stands. So option 2 and option 3 were looked over, and the bill before you is a combination of those. Let me be clear that every parent has the opportunity to opt out of newborn screening in a variety of ways, and maybe we should look at the little handout on here. A child is born, and you can choose to opt out of the newborn screening test, and they'll have a little form for you to fill out to do just that. You also could choose to do a private test with private storage. That is an option for every parent in the state of Minnesota. If you do choose to do the newborn screening test, we allow you to opt out after that. So you don't have to have your blood spots used for the screening program for new test development. That's an option for you. You can opt out then, and the spots will be destroyed. Or you can choose to leave your child's spots in the newborn screening program storage that have the data and the blood spots stored, and opt out any other time after that you choose. Or an 18-year-old, when they become an adult, they can choose to have their blood spots removed. So there are many, many opportunities for parents who have concerns to say, I don't want to participate. And then, members, the part that I really want you to be clear on, there is a difference between a study for new test development and research. They are not the same thing. New test development is done with spots that are disaggregated. There's no name attached to them at all. It is just a trial, a study to find out if new tests can be developed. Any research that is done, and it is often, let me be clear in case you're not aware of this, the research that is done with written, affirmed consent of every single person. And it is done typically on people who have a diagnosis. So for instance, a researcher might want to do research on PKU, and so they would choose to ask for written, affirmed consent by those members to do research. That's what's being done here. And you should also be very aware that there are very strict guidelines. There was a question about is privacy, can you be sure that the data is kept private? What kind of privacy protections are put in place? Newborn screening data is classified as private under both state and federal law, and MDH adheres strictly to all state and federal laws that govern individual privacy and health-related information. They follow very strict guidelines from beginning to end, and again, the research is consent only, affirmed written consent. Representative Holberg brought up that we swing back and forth. From 1965 to 2006, there was no swinging. It was the newborn screening program, and the results were kept, and they were stored indefinitely. And I might also mention that there is indefinite storage of data in almost half the states in this country, and 6 states allow indefinite storage of the spots, and Minnesota was a leader in research and newborn screening, and we would have been the 7th, and we've been pulled back from that right now. We do need to stop the swinging back and forth in the program. We need to have a solid program for newborn screening that is for the good of the public health and the good of the children in the state, and we can do that by passing this bill today, members. I really ask for your green vote and support.
Representative Fabian.
Mr. Speaker and the body, and to Representative Norton, I apologize. I know that this is a little bit out of what we normally do, but your comments raised a question for me, and in all sincerity, I would like to be able to ask just a couple of questions, Mr. Speaker, and like I said, I apologize for that. And it kind of draws me back to the comments that Representative Liebling made, and if I may, if you would indulge me, body, I would appreciate that. Representative Liebling, if she would stand for a question, Mr. Speaker.
She will. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Liebling, I think I heard you say in your comments that you understood the concerns, and that I think you said something to the effect that this bill could be fixed to address some of those concerns. Looking at where we are in this process now, how or where can we possibly fix this bill to address the concerns that so many people here in the body have?
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Fabian. Well, I'm not the author of the bill, so I don't know if this is going to conference. Maybe it's not. But I don't view this as a serious problem right now. As I said, the point of my comment was that I would find it very hard to believe that a court would basically look at this part that says that no research or public health studies other than those described in paragraph A shall be conducted without written consent as described under subdivision 7. I have a hard time believing that a court would look at that and say that doesn't mean anything because there's no difference between what's called research or public health studies and what is called studies related to newborn screening in the line above. I think those are very distinct things. I think a court, in order for a court to say that there's no difference, they would have to be absolutely ignoring the B part, and I just can't see that that would be happening. But let's face it, no legislation that ever comes to this floor is ever final. Things are always picked up again and tweaked in future years. If there's not a procedural way to do that yet this year, I don't think that even if there isn't, I don't think it's a serious enough problem to hold up this bill. I think that the fix that we're looking at today has waited long enough. I think it's critically important that we get this passed and signed into law.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, body, I apologize. If Representative Norton would yield to a question, please.
She will. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Norton, again, I apologize for being a little bit out of sync here. Do you see any place in the process now as it stands where we are that we could possibly address some of these issues?
Representative Norton.
Mr. Speaker, I think the issues that you're referring to are not things perhaps that many of us are interested in fixing. If there are small technical changes, those can be done, as Representative Liebling mentioned, at another time. As I anticipated, this bill will travel back to the Senate for concurrence, and we'll be done with it for this year. But as Representative Liebling said, there is always another year to adjust and fix technical changes.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, I'm a strong supporter of research. There's no question about it. And I toured, not too long ago, I actually toured a lab. And they were talking about full genome sequencing. And when we were talking about specific health benefits, it was absolutely intriguing, as all get out. And they were talking about how a person may, in the very near future, get predictive or personalized medicine. And I was absolutely fascinated. And then I started asking questions. And they started talking about there's specific genes that you could isolate, whether it has to do with stress, and whether or not a person could manage through that, and how some people may be better equipped at being managers of different corporations or whatever the case may be, or a crime gene, et cetera, et cetera. And then I started asking questions on whether or not they thought in the future that'll be a way people can determine whether or not they can become employed, whether or not that'll be a determining factor on hiring decisions, or whether or not who's better equipped to go on to a 4-year degree in college, or who is better qualified to become a legislator. And that's where it got extremely scary. And so, again, I am a strong supporter, like my friend Representative Zerwas, when it comes to medical research. There's no question about it. But Representative Lesch, you triggered some thoughts in your testimony here as well that brought me back to when I toured that lab, and that's where I got extremely concerned. And I think if I'm going to err on the side of being right or wrong on this issue, I'm going to err on the side of data privacy and privacy of the individual. Thank you.
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is not genetic sequencing being done at the Minnesota Department of Health. There is a tiny, what one might call, it might be perceived as being a genetic test for cystic fibrosis. That is part of the 56 disease or disability panel that's being done on the newborn screening test. Genomic sequencing is not being done on the blood. It will not be done on the blood, and if it is on the blood spots, and if it is in the newborn screening program, and if it is, there is some sequencing to be done in research, it will be with the written affirmative consent of the parents and the children involved.
Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the other part about sequencing, and this is where I'd like to have a little more clarification on that, because not only would it determine for myself on whether or not those decisions were made, but if you jump from just sheer DNA profiling and go to sequencing, that now it can affect what's going to happen with my children, or possible decisions that will be made around my children, or my children's children, or my relatives in general. And so that's why I said, when it's just talking about the health side of it, I'm absolutely fascinated. And I think that we can have great strides in medical and like I said, the individual personalized medicine. But if there's even the remote chance to have hiring decisions or whatever case may be surrounding that, that's where, like I said, if we're going to err, let's err on the side of privacy.
Representative Khan.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Hamilton, thanks to Representative Davids when he was chair of, I think, the Labor Committee, we had very, very strong laws. I think they were the first laws in the country related to genetic privacy not being used for hiring decisions. So it's specifically, again, we have, having been responsible for bringing up this issue before the legislature for the first time, and I'll say, I'm probably the only legislator in the country who has the picture of a gene on my bulletin board, and I actually extracted that DNA and took that picture myself. So I have a lot of familiarity with this issue. And we started out with the compliments of Representative Davids, who heard that bill when we were obviously in the minority, and we passed that. We had the strongest genetic privacy stipulations against using it in hiring decisions. And then we went on from there, and as I said, the law which caused the unfortunate Bearded decision, and as Representative Holberg pointed out, it was done because of a change in the coding. It was put, which a lesson to other members of the legislature is that I had to also look and see where the laws that you were written are being coded, because it was changed from where it was written to when it got passed by the reviser without me paying any attention to it, which meant I should have paid attention to it. But this specifically cannot be used in hiring. There is Representative Norton has adequately explained that the sequencing will not be done without consent.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Clerk will close the roll. Abler votes no. There being 69 ayes and 58 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. We're going to revert without objection to messages from the Senate.
Messages from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. This is the Bernardi motion. The Johnson C. motion, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, okay. You'll take that one?
Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to the following Senate File 390, an act relating to election. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. Senate conferees are Sieben, Hoffman, and Newman.
Representative Bernardi.
Bernardi moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with the like committee appointed by the Senate on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses.
Representative Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the technical bill for elections. We have a few things that we need to work out, and we would like to confer on it.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate. This is a Johnson C. motion. I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to the Senate File 2736, an act relating to public safety. The Senate requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. The Senate conferees are Kent, Goodwin, and Rosen. Johnson C. moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with the like committee appointed by the Senate on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Yes, we have. This is the GPS monitoring bill.
related to victims of domestic violence. And yes, we have some disagreements that need to be worked out in conference. That's my motion.
Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Announcement by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker announced the appointment of following members of the House to Conference Committee in House File 2834, Hortman, Morgan, Garofalo, Seltzer, and Simonson. Announcement by the Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a Conference Committee on Senate File 2390, Bernardi, Winkler, and Sanders. Announcement by the Speaker announced the appointment of the following members of the House to a Conference Committee on Senate File 2736, Johnson C., Hillstrom, and O'Neill.
Reports from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. Murphy E. for the Committee on Rules, pursuant to Rule 121 and 333, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for today for Monday, May 5th, 2014. Senate File Number 2449, House File Numbers 2852 and 2543, Senate File Number 2782, House File Numbers 2865 and 2684, Senate File Number 1900, House File Number 2402, and Senate File Number 2398.
Motions and resolutions. Copies of the non-controversial motions and resolutions are online and at the front desk. If there's no objection, we'll take action on those motions first. Hearing no objection, those motions prevail.
Moline moves that Senate File 2470 be recalled from the Committee on Education Policy and re-referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. That's my motion to recall Senate File 2470 from Education Policy and re-refer to the Committee on Rules.
Any discussion? Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Moline yield for a question?
She will. Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Moline, can you tell us what this bill does and why we're moving it?
Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Doubt. It's a bill relating to education, authorizing an innovative partnership to deliver educational and technology opportunities. Basically, it provides for the opportunity to create a joint powers board for schools that are collaborating. It missed deadline, so we need to move it into rules.
Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would she yield for another question?
She will. Representative Doubt.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Is this the vehicle bill for medical marijuana? Is that what we're doing here?
Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Doubt. Yes, this is a vehicle bill.
All those in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails.
Introduction of House Resolution Number 7, introduced by Erickson and others, a House resolution recognizing May 1st, 2014 as a day of prayer in Minnesota. The resolution is being referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Any announcements? Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, that resolution to which Al just referred is the resolution for the National Day of Prayer, which is today. You have at your places the draft of the resolution, and we are all invited to the rotunda following adjournment to attend the National Day of Prayer ceremony that is put on by the committee from Minnesota for the National Day of Prayer. Thank you very much.
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, members, just a reminder to the conferees and others that are interested in the supplemental appropriations bill. We'll be meeting 1/2 hour after the last body is adjourned, and I'm not sure if the Senate is still in session or not, but 1 hour after, or 1/2 hour after, in room 123.
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is just a reminder to the members of the Jobs and Economic Development Finance Committee.
We will have a half hour after session ends in room 200. We will meet to take up 3 bills total. Hopefully we can get together at 4:30 and get started and be done quickly.
Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And GOP members, just a quick announcement that we will return to caucus immediately after the National Day of Prayer ceremony in the rotunda. So probably in the course of about 15 minutes, we'll be back in caucus upstairs. Thank you.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Friday, May 2nd, 2014.
Representative Murphy moves that when the House adjourned today, it adjourn until 10 a.m. Friday, May 2nd, 2014. All those in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Representative Murphy.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Murphy moves the House do now adjourn. All in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Friday, May 2nd, 2014.